Welcome. If you've arrived here, perhaps not by chance, but by a quiet calling. This is the empty boat, a space adrift between sound and silence, between all that has been lost and all that may still be found. There is no one steering here, no destination to hurry toward, only stillness, only breath, only presence. In this boat, you do not need to know who you are. You are simply someone who is tired of the noise, someone seeking warmth but not fire, clarity but not answers. Tonight, we won't tell stories for the sake of stories. We will tell stories as keys, not to open the world, but to open the mind that sees the world. Through 25 drifting tales, rooted in Zen wisdom, woven with silence and softened by time, you may find yourself remembering something you never knew you'd forgotten. So, rest your shoulders. Let the breath settle. The wind no longer needs to push. You are here and the journey begins now. Story 1. The wind that refused to blow. There was once a village nestled deep in a quiet valley, cupped by old mountains that had long forgotten the sound of footsteps. This village had no clock towers, no horns, no alarms. Instead, it had wind. Wind was how the villagers measured time. Morning arrived with a soft northern breeze, tugging at rice stalks. Afternoon came as a warmer wind from the river. At dusk, the wind shifted eastward, carrying stories from the forest. And by night, it was the gentle downblow from the mountains, tucking the children in with a cool hush. No one questioned this rhythm. No one needed to. Wind was their breath, their prayer, their invisible guide. It turned their prayer wheels, carried their songs, whispered through the bamboo chimes hanging in every doorway. But then, one spring, the wind stopped. It did not pause. It did not slow. It simply vanished. Not a ripple on the pond. Not a single leaf stirred. Chimes fell still like forgotten relics. The prayer flags, bright streaks of red and gold, hung limp as if they too had forgotten what they were for. At first, the villagers waited. Perhaps it is resting, the elders said. Perhaps the mountains are holding their breath. But days became weeks, and the stillness stretched long and silent, like the shadows of forgotten monks. Something deeper began to happen. The people grew agitated. Harvesters could not time their planting. Children could not fall asleep without the whispering lull of wind. Birds seemed unsure of flight. The absence of the wind became more than silence. It became a wound. One by one, the villagers gathered before the temple and turned to the old abbot, a man known simply as Shoku. Master, they said, the wind is gone. Tell us what to do. Shoku, who had lived through 7 decades of wind and its silences, merely closed his eyes and asked, "When did you last listen to it?" The villagers looked at one another, unsure. "We hear it every day," one man said. "We've always heard it." Shoku shook his head slowly. "You heard the wind, but did you listen?" The villagers fell silent. "You expected it. You timed your day by it. You needed it to comfort you. You relied on it to move your flags and spin your wheels. But did you ever wonder why it came, or what it was asking in return?" A young girl stepped forward. She had large, steady eyes and a braid that reached her waist. "Where did it go, master?" Shoku smiled at her gently. "To the place where it is still loved." The girl thought about that for a long time. That night, while the others lit candles and argued about rituals to bring the wind back, she did something no one else did. She walked into the forest. There, beneath the canopy of silent trees, She sat, not to pray, not to beg, just to sit. And for the first time she did not wait for the wind. She did not demand its return. She simply let herself be empty. The night deepened. She closed her eyes. And in the space between two thoughts, she felt something unexpected. A stirring, not on her skin, but in her chest, a breath she had not noticed before. Her own breath. It moved in her like a river long ignored. And suddenly she realized. Perhaps the wind had not vanished. Perhaps it had simply returned to where it had always come from, inside. When she returned to the village at dawn, she said nothing. She did not need to. The people were still waiting for a miracle. She smiled and swept her front steps. She stirred the pot of rice. She listened to her own breathing, and then slowly, imperceptibly, a breeze touched her cheek. She did not gasp. She did not shout. She bowed. From that day, the wind did return. But not as it had before. It did not come on command. It came when the villagers no longer needed it, too. And the girl who had once asked, "Where did it go?" became the one who taught them how to listen, not to the wind, but to the silence it left behind. Zen reflection. In Zen, we often say, the wind does not move. The flag does not move. The mind moves. This story is not about the wind. It is about the part of us that grows attached to movement, the part that finds identity in rhythm and familiarity. Wind, like all things, is impermanent. When it disappears, we panic, not because the wind is gone, but because the structure we have built around it begins to crumble. Our routines, our sense of control, our belief that something outside us should always sustain us. But wind was never ours to hold. What the villagers lost was not the wind. What they lost was the ability to be still without it. Stillness is not the absence of wind. It is the presence of you, undistracted. Psychological reflection. Modern anxiety often arises from our relationship to control. We want predictability. We want cycles we can count on. Morning emails, scheduled calls, traffic sounds, background noise. But when those things pause, whether due to a loss, a breakup, an illness, or even a quiet weekend, we feel panic. Silence is no longer peace. It becomes vacuum. In psychology, this is called stimulus dependency. We become accustomed to external stimuli regulating our inner world. Yet healing begins when we reverse that, when we realize that inner presence can shape our perception of the outer world. That breath can be enough. That silence is not emptiness, but a rich soil for awareness. That little girl represents the mindful self, the one who pauses, who stops asking, "When will it come back?" and instead listens to what is already here. Stillness, self, breath, closing. Contemplation. Ask yourself tonight, what is the wind I keep waiting for to return? Is it love from another, a feeling of motivation, a sound, a message, a moment that I believe will fix me? Now ask, what if it's already here? What if I no longer needed it to come? What if silence is not absence, but presence in its truest form? As the Buddha once said, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. Breathe. In once, slowly, feel it. That wind you were waiting for. It was always you. Story 2. The monk who carried the river. It was a dry season in the middle mountains of the east, the kind that left the earth cracking in fine lines. like age on a forgotten face. Birds flew lower. Trees spoke less. Even the monks in the riverside monastery shortened their chants, as if words themselves grew thirsty. There was one monk among them who had arrived recently. Young, full of hunger, not for food, but for enlightenment. His name was Tenay. He bowed lower than required, sat longer than others, memorized sutras late into the night, even as the frogs stopped croaking and the temple oil thinned. His questions were precise, often urgent. He wanted to awaken. And soon. "Master," he asked one day as they swept the dustless stone paths of the garden, "what is the quickest way to be free of suffering?" The master, an old man with robes faded to the color of cloud, glanced up, not from the path, but from the sky. "You are not suffering," the master said softly. "You are anticipating the end of suffering. That is another prison." Tenay did not answer. He swept harder. That evening, the master gave Tenay a task. "You are to go down to the river. It is still flowing." "Fetch water in this bucket," he said, handing him a small wooden pail, its handle smooth with years of use. "But take the long way back to the monastery, through the forest trail." Tenay nodded, eager for the metaphor that must be waiting. He walked down, filled the bucket, and returned through the trees, cradling the water carefully. Along the way, a twig caught his sleeve, spilling a little. He scolded himself. At one point, he tripped and had to kneel, the surface trembling dangerously. But he made it back, offering the bucket to the master with pride. "Well done," said the master. Now, again. The next day, and the next. Again and again. For weeks. Each time, down to the river, through the long path, return without spilling. At first, Tenay searched for hidden meanings, counting his steps, meditating on each drop. Then frustration. Why repeat this? Eventually, the task became background, just breath and movement, no more questions. Until one morning, Tenay returned early from the river. The master was seated outside under a cypress tree. Tenay looked different. His brow was no longer folded, his mouth slightly parted. In his hands was the bucket, but it was empty. The master said nothing, only waited, and Tenay spoke. There was no need to carry the water anymore. "I realized I've been trying to bring the river with me, but it is always there. I was the one who left it." The master nodded gently. "Now," he said, "go sit by the river, not to fetch, not to return, just to watch." Tenay did, and, for the first time, he did not see the river as something to use, but as something that simply was, something that flowed, like thought, like pain, like love, like life. Zen reflection. In Zen tradition, water is often a symbol of mind. The moment you try to hold water, it slips, but when you let it flow, it carries you. The young monk, Tenay, believed that spiritual knowledge was something to be collected, carried, delivered to someone, perhaps even back to himself. But truth is not cargo. Enlightenment is not a bucket of wisdom brought from one place to another. It is the river itself. And once you realize you cannot take it with you, you begin to see you never needed to, just as the Buddha taught. You cannot step into the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and you are not the same person. The path is not accumulation, it is surrender. Psychological reflection, modern seekers, spiritual, intellectual, emotional, often fall into a quiet trap. The belief that healing or clarity is something that can be achieved, stored, and then carried forward into life. We collect experiences, courses, books, retreats, quotes. We hold insights like trophies, retelling them in journals or to friends. But when suffering returns, as it always does, we feel betrayed. I already did the work, we say. But healing is not a permanent acquisition. It is a river, always moving, always different. What makes us suffer is not the pain itself, but the weight we carry trying to fix the pain permanently. Tene's bucket represents that very effort, to preserve, to contain, to bring the river with him in case it disappears. In psychology, this is close to what's called emotional over-control, the desire to manage and contain all emotional responses, leading to exhaustion and disconnection from spontaneity. We don't allow the river to flow through us. We try to capture it in buckets, perfect schedules, self-improvement rituals, emotional defenses. But the more we try to carry the river, the more we suffer. Freedom begins when we set the bucket down, when we realize we can return to the source, anytime. Closing contemplation. Ask yourself now, what am I carrying that I no longer need? What river am I trying to contain in a bucket instead of returning to its banks? What wisdom have I turned into burden? Tonight, try not to fetch, try not to hold. Just sit beside the river of your breath. Watch thoughts pass like floating leaves. Remember the Buddha's words. You are not the drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. And sometimes, the most enlightened thing you can do is not to carry the water at all, but simply to trust that it flows, even when you're not watching. Story 3. The Stone Ladder. Long ago, on the edge of a wind-burnt plateau where the earth cracked into terraces and cliffs, there lived a man named Yori, who dreamed only of the mountaintop. It was not just a peak to him, it was the peak, the one he had seen in his childhood when his mother pointed to the white tip glowing in the sunset and said, "That is where the wise live, where pain cannot follow." Yori believed her. He believed so deeply that every night before sleep, he would stare at the distant summit until his eyes blurred. The mountain did not move, but his longing did. Deeper, more urgent, more shaped by time. As he grew, he began to prepare. He was methodical, careful, dedicated. He carved stones from nearby quarries, each smooth and square, strong enough to bear weight. With these, he began to build a ladder, not a ladder of rope or wood, which might rot or break, but a ladder of stone. His thinking was clear. If I build it slowly, if each step is solid, then I will reach the top and never fall. Every day he laid one more stone, leveled it, fixed it in place with care. Then the next, one step, then another. As the seasons passed, villagers visited him, curious. "Why not walk the path up the back of the ridge?" some asked. "It is less steep," said others. "There's already a way." But Yori would only shake his head. "Those paths are not mine. I will reach the top when the ladder is ready." No shortcuts. The villagers stopped coming. The children grew up and forgot about him. But Yori remained, aging with the rocks. Years passed, then decades. His beard grew silver. His spine curved like a question left unanswered. Yet his hands, calloused, cracked, still lifted stone after stone. Until one day, he could no longer lift the next. The final step remained unfinished. He sat down beside his ladder, breath heavy, arms trembling. The summit still gleamed in the distance, untouched, unspoiled. He had never reached it. and for the first time he cried, not out of pain, but out of understanding. The ladder had never moved. He had never moved. The mountain remained where it always had been. He had built a path not upward, but in place, a staircase of fear, of perfection, of hesitation. He had confused preparation with progress. That night, under a silvered sky, Yori lay down beside the stones he had shaped with his life, and he whispered, "Perhaps the path was not to the summit, but away from the sun. Need to reach it." When the morning came, the villagers found his body, still, but at peace. They did not mourn. They did something better. They gathered his stones, everyone, and used them to repair the broken trails up the mountain. Now, when people climb that slope, they do not see a ladder, but they walk with sure footing, not knowing they are, stepping on the dreams of a man who once thought he had to build his own way, instead of take the first step. Zen reflection. Zen teaches us that the path is walked, not designed. The mind craves structure, rituals, systems, ladders we believe will carry us safely to awakening. But the mountain never demanded that from us. Yori's ladder is the mind's obsession with control. Each stone is a condition. I must be ready. I must understand more. I must become stronger before I begin. We spend years building the perfect container for progress, but we do not progress. In Zen, the step is the teacher, not the stone beneath it. The Buddha walked, the monks walked. Even Bodhidharma, who meditated for 9 years facing a wall, eventually stood and walked away. No one reached freedom by waiting until they were fully prepared. The preparation is the resistance. Psychological reflection. In psychological terms, Yori suffered from a form of perfection paralysis, a pattern where a person delays action endlessly until they feel ready enough. This readiness, however, is elusive. The goalpost moves, the ladder stretches higher, and life becomes a preparation to live, rather than the living itself. Many modern people are trapped in this. We stack books we haven't read, subscribe to courses we won't finish, tell ourselves we will love more, rest more, speak more, once we're ready, once the inner ladder is high enough. But true change, growth, healing, these are processes, not destinations. No one heals by preparing to heal. They heal by taking the first messy, imperfect, unguaranteed step. They stumble, they adjust, they bleed and learn, but they move. Yori never moved, and in doing so, he built a monument to inaction. Ironically, his stones only helped others once he was gone. How many parts of your life are built like that? How many ladders lead nowhere? Closing contemplation tonight, ask yourself gently, what am I endlessly preparing for? Where have I mistaken readiness for action? What ladder am I building that I may never climb? Then breathe. Feel your feet on the ground, not on the steps you think you need, but on the earth, as it is now. The Buddha once said, "There are only 2 mistakes one can make along the road to truth. Not going all the way and not starting. You don't need a full plan. You don't need certainty. You need only a breath and the courage to move, not upward, not perfectly, but forward." But, story 4. The bamboo that forgot it was hollow. In a valley where mist lingered like memory and rain came without warning, there grew a grove of ancient bamboo. They stood shoulder to shoulder, tall and straight, swaying not in resistance, but in elegant surrender. These bamboos had stood through typhoons, snow, drought, and the rare joy of summer wind. They were known by the villagers as the listening trees, for even in silence they seemed to hear something that others missed. Among them grew one bamboo, younger than the rest, thinner at the joints, but taller than all. The villagers named it Kiko, which meant rising breath. It shot up fast, its green skin shimmering with pride. Birds chose it first for rest. Sunlight lingered on its leaves. Even the wind, when passing, seemed to bow around its form. And Kiko noticed. It noticed the admiration. It noticed the shadows it cast on shorter stalks. It noticed that when storms came, others bent, but it resisted, rigid, upright, unwilling to yield. It felt strong, but over time, something shifted. The storms grew wilder. The earth moaned in unfamiliar ways. One day, a wind unlike any before came roaring through the valley. It was not malicious, but it was unrelenting. It called upon the trees to dance. It called upon the grasses to flatten. It called upon the bamboo to remember. And Kiko tried to stand tall. It tried to brace itself, to hold firm, to show it could endure. But the more it resisted, the more it strained. And then, without ceremony, without sound, Kiko snapped. Not at the top, but at the root. The villagers found it days later, lying at an awkward angle, its proud height now bent like a broken bow. They mourned it, but not for long. Bamboo breaks often. It was part of life. What lingered, however, was what they found inside the break. The hollow was filled, not with dirt or mould, but with hardened clay. Packed tightly, dense, unnatural. The elder of the village, a former monk named Hanno, examined it and said quietly, "It forgot it was hollow." No one understood what he meant. But that night, under the stars, he told the children gathered around him the story of what bamboo truly was. A vessel, he said. Not a wall, not a tower, not a shield. A vessel for wind to pass through, for rain to echo, for time to move without clinging. He looked at the broken stalk. Once, it must have begun to fear emptiness, so it filled itself with what it thought was strength. But clay cannot bend. Clay does not sing. Then he turned to the children. When you forget your hollowness, you will also forget how to yield. And when you no longer yield, you break. No one spoke after that. But in the morning, a young girl went to the grove and stood among the remaining bamboo. She closed her eyes, and instead of asking how they stood so long, she listened, and she heard the wind not pushing, but passing through. Zen reflection. In Zen, we speak often of emptiness, shunyata in Sanskrit, but this is not void, not absence. Emptiness, in the Zen sense, is openness. The bamboo does not resist the wind because it is weak, but because it is empty. And in that emptiness is strength, flexibility, wisdom. To be hollow is not to lack, it is to be spacious. Kiko's downfall came not from being young, nor tall, but from trying to be full. It believed that to endure meant to fill the hollow with something solid, something permanent. But the nature of bamboo is not permanence, it is flow. In Zen temples, the shakuhachi, a traditional flute, is made from bamboo. It plays not because of the material, but because of the space inside. We are not our substance, we are our openness. As the Zen saying goes, it is the silence between the notes that makes the music. Psychological reflection. Many of us, like Kiko, begin life open, curious, pliable. But as we grow, shaped by expectations, wounds, and fears, we begin to fill ourselves, not always consciously. We fill with rigid beliefs, with emotional armor, with tightly held identities. We believe strength is in firmness, strong opinions, unbreakable routines, hardened convictions. But psychological resilience does not come from rigidity. It comes from flexibility, emotional, cognitive, relational. This is the concept of psychological flexibility, a cornerstone of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. It is the ability to stay in contact with the present moment and adjust one's behavior in service of chosen values, even in the face of discomfort. Rigid people break under pressure. Flexible ones bend and return. Kiko filled its hollowness because it feared emptiness. So do we. We fear that if we are not full of something, we are nothing. But often, our deepest healing begins when we make space. Space for uncertainty. Space for other perspectives. Space for grief. To echo space, for joy, to surprise us. The bamboo that bends survives. The mind that softens heals. Closing. Contemplation tonight. Breathe in and ask yourself, where in my life have I filled myself out of fear? What beliefs, patterns, or roles do I cling to that make me feel solid? And what might happen if I let myself be hollow again? Close your eyes and imagine yourself as a stalk of bamboo in a vast grove. Feel the wind, not pushing you, not testing you, but moving through you. Remember the words of the Buddha. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. You are not weak for yielding. You are wise for remembering what you are made of. Story 5. The bowl that remembered the sky. There was once a monk who lived on the outer edge of a mountainside temple, just where the stone paths gave way to wild earth. His name was Sota, and though he was young, he had already endured more winters than his heart should have known. Sota did not speak much. His robes were always patched, and his sandals repaired more times than they were replaced. But no one minded. He did his chores with devotion. He listened without interruption. He bowed with a slowness that made the moment feel larger. He was known for carrying a single black lacquered bowl, deep, round, with a delicate lip and a faint crack that curved along one edge like a thread of lightning frozen in glass. The bowl had been gifted to him by an old teacher who passed away in the same year the war ended. Since then, Sota had never eaten from anything else. Each morning, he would rise before the bell, carry the bowl down to the river, rinse it in the cold stream, then sit quietly on the bank. Sometimes he would place it beside him and gaze at it. Other times he would turn it upside down and rest his palms atop it in stillness. Some of the younger monks whispered among themselves, "Why does he treat it like a relic? Why doesn't he repair that crack?" But no one asked aloud. It seemed sacred. Then one spring, during the rice blessing ceremony, the bowl slipped from Sota's hands. It fell in front of the altar, struck a stone, and split cleanly in two. There was a silence in the hall, not of reverence, but of breath withheld. Sota stood without flinching. He looked at the two halves of the bowl, then at the offering of rice that had spilled onto the temple floor like soft snow. He did not cry. He did not sweep the mess. Instead, he knelt, and for the first time in years, he spoke. "Now," he said softly, "it can finally see the sky again." No one understood. That night, while others whispered behind paper walls, the head abbot came to Sota's quarters. "Tell me," the abbot said, "what did you mean?" Sota, seated cross-legged with the two pieces of the bowl before him, ran his finger gently along the crack. When I was young, he said, I would eat in the courtyard. One day, I finished early and left my bowl outside. It rained. A pool formed inside. I looked in and saw the sky. He paused. From then on, I tried to keep the bowl perfect. I wanted to preserve that moment, but the more I protected it, the less sky it could hold. It became something to fear losing, not something to live with. The abbot nodded slowly. And now? Now it's broken, Sota said, which means it's open. It cannot hold rice anymore, but perhaps it can hold something wider. The abbot smiled. Like what? Sota lifted the two pieces and turned them outward, like a blossom opening to air, like the part of me that no longer clings. Zen reflection. In Zen, objects often carry meaning, not because of their permanence, but because of their impermanence. A bowl, like a bell or a robe, is both tool and teacher. Sota's bowl was once a vessel for nourishment, but over time, it became a symbol of memory, of attachment. He revered it not as a bowl, but as a fixed image of something he once felt. Beauty, stillness, the reflection of the sky. This is how the mind operates. It sees beauty and wants to keep it. It touches peace and wants to freeze it. But beauty that cannot move becomes a burden. Peace that is not alive becomes porcelain. Zen teaches us, when the cup is broken, do not mourn the cup. Celebrate the emptiness that it reveals. Sota's awakening did not come when the bowl was whole. It came when it broke, and he saw that he no longer needed it to remember what was beyond it. Psychological reflection. In psychological terms, Sota's relationship with the bowl mirrors what's called symbolic attachment, where we anchor memory, identity, or safety into an object. This could be a ring from someone we lost, a childhood toy, an old sweater that still smells like home. There is nothing inherently wrong in keeping such items. They comfort, they connect. But problems arise when the object begins to own us, when we preserve it so tightly that we stop evolving. Like Sota, we begin to fear its loss more than we enjoy its presence. And so we protect it, wrap it in avoidance, refuse to let time or change touch it. But in doing so, we also freeze the part of ourselves connected to it. Psychological healing often involves not just letting go of pain, but letting go of the containers we've placed our healing into. A relationship, a role, a belief, even a ritual. Sota's realization that the broken bowl could now see the sky is a metaphor for liberation from fixation. The object that once held meaning now makes space for new meaning, not because it's gone, but because it has opened. Closing. Contemplation. Ask yourself now, what is the bowl in my life? Something I protect not for what it is, but for what I believe it represents. Have I made it so sacred that I no longer allow life to touch it? What would it mean to let it break? Close your eyes tonight. Imagine placing that bowl, that memory, that story, that role into your hands. Let it fall, not to destroy it, but to let the sky back in. Remember this from the Dhammapada. Let go of the past, let go of the future, let go of the present, and cross to the farther shore of existence. With mind wholly free, you shall come no more to birth and death. There is beauty in holding, there is peace in letting go. But sometimes the deepest clarity comes only through the crack. Story 6. The Hermit Who Never Arrived. There once lived a man named Daiichi who believed enlightenment lay at the farthest edge of the world. He was not foolish. In fact, He was known in his village as a scholar of great precision, a man who read ancient texts with the fervour of hunger and practiced rituals as if time itself bowed to him. Daiichi had heard of a sacred mountain far beyond the reach of most men. It was said that on its peak stood a hermit, a being of immense stillness who had not spoken in 40 years. The legend claimed, anyone who reaches him and remains silent in his presence for 7 days will be free of all suffering. Daiichi knew he must go. He made preparations, sold his belongings, copied sacred scriptures into a single scroll, and packed only what was necessary: a staff, 2 sets of robes, dried rice, and his flute. On the morning of his departure, he bowed to no one. He whispered a vow to himself: I will not return until I am free. He walked east. Years passed. He crossed forests where the trees whispered doubts. He slept beside roads haunted by echoes of his former life. He sat in temples, traded wisdom with monks, and sometimes taught more than he learned. But he always moved on. Everywhere he went, he asked the same question: do you know the path to the hermit? Many had heard of him. No one had met him. Still, Daiichi pressed forward. He climbed cliffs, crossed rivers, watched empires rise and fall like sandcastles. The scroll he carried grew worn. The rice dwindled. His beard turned silver, then white, but always onward. Decades passed. Eventually, he came to a village at the foot of the final mountain. The air here was different, thinner, colder, as if every breath had to be earned. He stood before the slope, so steep it seemed to pierce the clouds, and he wept, not because he was tired, but because he believed he had arrived. The villagers welcomed him gently. They offered warm broth and quiet company. He declined both. I must climb, he said. The hermit is near. But an old woman stopped him. Many have come, she said. None have returned. I do not wish to return, Daiichi replied. She looked at him for a long time, then pointed. The path is there, but you may find the peak less distant than you believe. He did not understand. Still, he climbed. The path twisted like the question he had carried for years. When will I arrive? Every step was heavier than the last. The cold crept into his bones like forgotten sorrow. He lost track of time. His mind began to loosen, not from madness, but from memory, until one day he reached a small stone hut, perched alone on a cliff's edge, facing the wide blue void. There was no gate, no guards, just a doorway open to wind. Daiichi entered. Inside, the air was still. There was a cushion, a single candle, a scroll on the wall that read, "Here, there is no further." And in the center sat a man, or what seemed like one, still as mountain. Breathing slower than sleep, Daiichi fell to his knees. He said nothing. He did not need to. He remained. One day, then another, then 7. Nothing was said. Nothing moved. On the 8th day, Daiichi stood and bowed. He turned to leave, expecting something, a blessing, a gesture, a final koan. But the hermit did not look up, because the hermit was not a person. It was a statue, weathered, cracked, hollow-eyed. Daiichi staggered. He looked again. The stillness had fooled him, or perhaps revealed him. He sat down in the snow outside the hut and laughed, not out of anger, not even bitterness, but recognition. He had walked for 40 years to find silence, only to realize silence had walked with him the entire time. He had longed for someone to show him peace, only to discover peace had been waiting for him to stop searching. In that moment, Daichi became what he had sought. He remained at the mountain's edge until his final breath, not as a pilgrim, not as a teacher, but simply as one who had arrived by no longer arriving. When villagers climbed up years later, they found only a hut, a cushion, a statue, and a second seat beside it, empty, but still warm. Zen reflection. This story embodies one of the central paradoxes of Zen. The destination is not a place you reach, but a realization you stop resisting. Daichi believed that awakening was far away, hidden, distant, granted by someone else. So he journeyed, he disciplined, he persevered. But the hermit he longed to meet was never separate from him. As the great Zen master Linji said, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Not out of disrespect, but because the Buddha you seek externally is only ever a reflection of your own mind's longing. The path does not end in finding someone else. It ends in recognizing what was already here. The true teacher does not live on a mountain. The true teacher is your willingness to sit with what is." Psychological reflection. Daichi's journey reflects what psychologists often observe in spiritual and self-development circles: externalization of growth. We often believe healing, wisdom, or peace lie in a future version of ourselves, or in the presence of a guru, retreat, or extraordinary circumstance. This creates what's known as arrival fallacy, the illusion that fulfillment lies just ahead, if only we work a bit harder, go a bit further, try a bit longer. But this future self-fixation pulls us away from the very presence we need to cultivate. We miss the small silences, the momentary joys, the subtle insights, because we're staring too hard into the horizon. Daichi mistook the outer journey for the inner one, yet all along, it was not the mountain that transformed him. It was the walking, the questions, the letting go. The hermit statue was not a deception. It was a mirror, and in seeing that, Daichi stopped chasing. In modern therapy, we often guide clients toward radical acceptance, the ability to be fully present with what is, without grasping for what should be. This is not passivity, but clarity. Clarity that sometimes the end of seeking is the beginning of seeing. Closing contemplation tonight. Ask yourself, quietly, gently, what mountain am I climbing? What do I believe waits for me at the peak? And have I already passed by what I came for? Close your eyes. Listen to the silence between your thoughts. Imagine that silence taking form, not as a master in robes, but as you, sitting without needing to be anything more. Remember the words of the Buddha: "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path, and perhaps the path ends when we stop walking away from where we already are." Story 7. The river that sank upward. There was a town surrounded by mountains and history, where the river no longer flowed the way rivers usually do. It moved backward, not in illusion, not a trick of the eye, or a dream recounted by old men. The river, once flowing from the snow-touched ridges down through the valley and into the sea, had begun to reverse its path, slowly at first, then with certainty. Each morning, people gathered at the banks, eyes wide, mouths full of questions. They could not form. The water climbed uphill. It pushed against gravity as if answering a different kind of law, not of physics, but of yearning. No one knew why. The elders blamed forgotten rituals. The scholars debated unseen forces. The priests whispered of punishment, but no explanation satisfied the town's aching sense that something inside them had shifted, and the river was only the mirror. A child named Aiko was the first to stop asking why. She was 10, quiet, often found barefoot at the edge of the stream, watching water as one might watch breath, not to control it, but to know it. One day, while the townspeople argued over solutions and sacrifices, Aiko followed the river upstream. She walked, not with urgency, but with a still curiosity. With each step, she watched the current move past her, defiant, determined, yet oddly graceful. It was as if the river wasn't fighting nature. It was remembering something older than direction. After many hours, she came to a small wooden bridge. Beneath it, in a soft bend of water and stone, sat an old man. He was fishing, though his line was slack and his eyes were closed. Aiko stood, watching. Eventually, he spoke without opening his eyes. "You've come far to follow what returns." She said nothing. He opened one eye and smiled. "They want to know why the river runs backward." She nodded. He leaned forward, hands resting on his knees. "But the real question," he said, "is why the people do." She blinked. He gestured. "To the river. This water remembers the sea. But the people down there, they remember only what they've lost. And in that remembering, they pull life toward what has already ended." Aiko sat beside him. "What do you mean?" He picked up a leaf and placed it on the water. They both watched it drift upstream. "Grief," he said, "is holy. Memory is sacred. But when memory becomes the compass, we drift toward what cannot return." He turned to her. "The river is not rebelling. It is reflecting." Then he said, "No more." Aiko did not ask further. She sat with him until dusk, then returned home. She did not speak of it to the others, but the next morning she brought a flower to the river and let it go, watched it travel, not away, but toward something hidden in the hills. And from that day forward, she did not fear where it was going. Zen reflection. Zen speaks not only of emptiness, but of directionless being, of movement without destination, of effort without grasping. The river, in this story, does not flow wrong. It flows differently, revealing that nature does not always obey our expectations, especially when our minds are tangled in attachment. The river's reversal is not dysfunction, it is a teaching. The great Zen master Dogen once said, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things." In forgetting direction, the river becomes free. In forgetting certainty, the child becomes wise. In Zen, we often think of water as both metaphor and method. It yields but wears down stone. It has no self, and thus becomes everything. The river that sank upward only appeared unnatural because we are trained to think in lines, not circles. Progress, not presence. Forward, not inward. But perhaps the truest path is not the one that goes further, but the one that returns home. Psychological reflection. In psychological terms, the river symbolizes memory, grief, and the human tendency to ruminate, to cycle endlessly through past events in the hope that some new insight, some clarity will emerge that finally allows us to let go. But often it doesn't. We revisit conversations, losses, betrayals. We revisit younger selves, unlived lives. We think this is healing. Sometimes it is. But more often, it is stagnation disguised as seeking. Rumination pulls the mind upstream, against the natural flow of time. Just as the townspeople could not move forward while obsessing over the river's reversal, we too can become trapped in retrospective identity, defining ourselves not by what we're becoming, but by what we've lost. Aiko, the child, represents psychological flexibility, the ability to witness experience without becoming engulfed by it. She does not resist the river. She follows it, not to explain it, but to understand it. And the old man? He is memory made wise. He does not fish to catch, he fishes to watch, to witness, to be present. In many forms of therapy, particularly ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, patients are taught to step back from the stream of thought, to watch without reacting, to release the compulsion to analyze pain into submission. This story reminds us, sometimes letting go is not forcing ourselves to move on. It's allowing the river to run as it does, and choosing to sit beside it without needing to reverse it. Closing contemplation. Take a moment. Place yourself beside a river, not in fantasy, but in feeling. Sense its current, its cool breath, its movement, not away, but deeper. Now ask, what part of my life am I still pulling upstream? What memory, loss, or regret do I keep trying to fix by holding it tighter? What would it feel like to let the river flow without needing to know where it leads? The Buddha once said, "You cannot travel the path until you become the path itself." Tonight, don't ask the river to change direction. Instead, ask where it touches you most gently, and sit there without needing to explain why. For not all healing moves forward. Some of it simply learns to move with the water. Story 8. The Candle Beneath the Waterfall. There is a cliff in the eastern province of Ayama where water never ceases to fall. From high above, a slender stream tumbles down in a silver arc, not loud, not roaring, but persistent, like time whispered into stone. The villagers call it Kuronami, the dark wave, though the water is clear. It earned its name not for its color, but for its secret. Because behind the waterfall, hidden by its curtain, there once burned a flame. Not a myth, not a poetic imagining. A real flame, a single candle, lit, dry, and unwavering, tucked into a hollow behind the veil of falling water. People came from nearby towns to witness it. They brought offerings, incense, questions. They bowed before the cascade, then parted the water with their hands to peer behind. And there it was, always lit, always waiting. No one knew who lit it. No one knew how it stayed burning. Rain came, wind howled, and yet the candle never dimmed, until one day it went out. No storm, no quake, no explanation. The next morning, only a trail of smoke remained. The village grew restless. A sign, they said. Something is wrong, but no one dared approach the waterfall to see why. They feared disrespecting the mystery, or worse, learning the truth. Except for one. Her name was Haru, a quiet potter who lived at the edge of the village with her father, a former stonemason, who had gone mute after her mother died. Haru was known for her hands, delicate, strong, clay-stained, and her silence. She did not offer many words, but when she looked at something, she saw its essence. And she had seen the candle long ago, when she was a child, when her father lifted her over the stream and let her glimpse behind the water. She had never forgotten it, so when it went out, she felt something stir, not fear, not sadness, but a calling. That evening, As the village murmured and debated, Haru walked alone to the waterfall. She did not bow. She did not speak. She simply stood before the cascade and stepped through it. Cold water soaked her sleeves. Her breath caught. But behind the veil, the hollow remained, dry, smooth, just wide enough for one to kneel. The candle sat in the center, its wick curled and blackened. No sign of intrusion, no ash, no damage. She knelt, waited, touched the base of the candle holder. It was warm. Suddenly she understood. The flame had not been extinguished. It had withdrawn. She closed her eyes, reached into her satchel and drew out a single match. She struck it slowly, carefully, and relit the candle. But as it sparked back to life, something unexpected happened. She heard her father's voice, not out loud, but clear in her memory. Some lights do not need protection, only space. When Haru returned to the village the next morning, the people crowded her with questions. Is the candle lit? Was it damaged? She said only this: it was never meant to burn for us. Then she went home and shaped a new pot, wide and hollow, with a small opening at the top. When it was fired and cooled, she placed a candle inside and never lit it. Zen reflection. The candle beneath the waterfall speaks of that paradox at the center of Zen, that the most delicate truths do not survive because they are shielded, but because they are not interfered with. The flame burned not in defiance of water, but in harmony with the space behind it. Its life depended not on the villager's belief, nor on ritual, but on the silence of its surroundings. When it went out, the people panicked, not because the candle died, but because their need to believe was disturbed. In Zen, we say, when the candle burns, do not cling to the light. When it fades, do not cling to the dark. Haru did not relight the flame to restore faith. She relit it to remind the space of its own nature, and then she walked away. No celebration, no claim, no clinging. In doing so, she honored the teaching the villagers had missed. Some mysteries do not ask to be understood, only witnessed. Psychological reflection, in therapeutic language, the flame beneath the waterfall can be understood as inner awareness, the fragile, quiet self that remains present beneath the noise, beneath the cascade of thoughts, responsibilities, distractions. Most people believe that awareness needs constant tending through meditation apps, affirmations, wellness habits, and while these can help, they often become new noise. Real awareness, the kind that heals, is like the candle. It already exists in stillness. Our task is not to keep it burning through effort, but to stop pouring more water over it. When we panic at its dimming, we act from fear. We seek stimulation, quick answers, validation. We forget that the candle's life is not measured in how bright it shines, but in how undisturbed it is. Burnout, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion often come not from too little light, but from too much effort to maintain a light that is meant to rest. Haru's insight reflects a deep principle in trauma recovery, that healing requires safety, not intensity. The mind returns to calm not when we demand it to shine, but when we create the hollow behind the waterfall, the space where breath and presence can be remembered. Closing contemplation, sit with this for a moment. Where is your flame? Is it burning for others or for you? Have you created space around it? Or have you built a wall of effort to protect it? Now imagine stepping through your own waterfall, the noise, the pressure, the habits. Step through, into the hollow, into the quiet. Find the candle, and instead of forcing it to burn brighter, just be with it. As the Buddha said, just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. But that life, it does not scream, it does not compete. It flickers, it waits, and sometimes it rests. Tonight, let it rest and trust. It has not gone out. It has only returned to the space that always knew how to hold it. Story 9. The Goat and the Open Gate. There was once a small dusty farm at the edge of the hills, where the grass grew in patches and the wind arrived only on weekends, as if reluctant to visit. On this farm lived a single goat, tethered to a wooden post just a few feet from the gate. No one remembered when the goat had first been tied. Some said it had been since birth, others believed its mother had once roamed freely, but the reins and the fences had turned freedom into inconvenience. The rope was not cruel. It gave the goat room to turn, lie down, and reach a patch of grass or two. But never the gate. Never the road beyond, and certainly never the wide, green field on the other side. The goat bleated sometimes, not out of misery, but out of something quieter, a kind of remembering. A tug from a part of itself that had never fully accepted the radius of its world. Then one summer afternoon, the farmer, growing old and soft in the bones, walked over with a knife. He bent down, and with a few strokes, cut the rope clean. The goat flinched but did not run. The farmer pointed to the open gate, which had remained ajar for days, swinging slightly, as if sighing in the heat. "There," the farmer said, "you're free." Then he turned and walked back to the house. But the goat did not move. Not that day, not the day after. It continued to graze in the same worn circle, lay in the same patch of shade, walk in slow, familiar loops, though no rope remained. Though the gate yawned open. Weeks passed, the villagers whispered, "Maybe it's dumb. Maybe it likes captivity. Maybe it doesn't know the gate is open." But one child disagreed. "I think it knows," she said. "It just forgot what it means to walk through." That evening, while the moon climbed quietly over the hills, the child crept to the farm and sat near the goat. She said nothing, just sat. Eventually, the goat turned its head. The girl stood, walked slowly to the gate, and stepped outside. She looked back, then sat just beyond the threshold. The goat stared at her, then at the post where its rope had once been, then at its own feet. And slowly, not boldly, not even confidently, it stepped forward. One hoof, then another. No one cheered, no one clapped. But the wind, which had not visited all week, stirred at last, brushing over the goat's back like a hand it almost remembered. And just like that, it crossed the gate, not into paradise, not into legend, but into choice. Zen reflection. The goat story is deceptively simple, but within it lies one of the core teachings of Zen. Liberation is not escape. It is awakening to what has always been available. The rope had been cut. The gate was open. There were no guards, no punishment awaiting. And yet, the goat remained. Why? Because in Zen, bondage is rarely about physical barriers. It is about habit, conditioning, mindset. As the Zen master Bankei wrote, "Don't try to get rid of delusion, only cease to cherish it." The goat did not cherish the rope, but it knew it. It was familiar, predictable, even safe, and so, like many of us, It chose what was known over what was free. Freedom isn't given. Freedom must be remembered and then practiced. Step by step. Psychological reflection. This story echoes what modern psychology calls learned helplessness, a condition in which a person, after repeated experiences of powerlessness, internalizes the belief that their actions have no effect, even when circumstances change. First identified by psychologists Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer, this concept helps explain why people often stay in situations that harm them. Toxic relationships, unfulfilling jobs, restrictive environments. Even when escape is possible. It's not because they enjoy suffering. It's because the memory of constraint becomes stronger than the awareness of choice. The goat had been tied so long that even without the rope, it continued to behave as if it was still bound. Many of us live like this. We carry invisible tethers, the belief we are unlovable, the fear that failure defines us, the story that we are not ready or not enough, even when the gate is open, even when the world whispers, "You can go now." We hesitate, because the idea of freedom without familiarity can feel more terrifying than captivity with routine. But healing begins when we do what the child did. We do not yell, we do not force, we simply sit beside the gate and wait for the moment when something inside us remembers. We can take one step, just one, toward the unchained life. Closing contemplation tonight. Ask gently, what rope am I still walking around? Even though it's gone, what part of my life is a gate that has been open all along? And who or what sits just beyond it, waiting for me to remember? Close your eyes. Picture your own post, the space you've circled 1,000 times. Feel the familiar path beneath your feet. Then, notice the stillness of the rope. No tension, no pull. Now look up, the gate, open, just beyond. Not heaven, not fantasy, but air, possibility. A life not dictated by memory, but shaped by movement. Remember the Buddha's words. No one outside ourselves can rule us inwardly. When we know this, we become free. Freedom is not in running. It is in recognizing that no one is holding you anymore, not even you. Take one step, that is all, and the wind will find you. Story 10. The raindrop that forgot itself. There was once a cloud that wandered farther than all others, a lone puff of vapor drifting above forests, mountains, and seas. It did not envy the heavy rain clouds that gathered in herds, nor did it mourn the shape it had yesterday. It simply moved, carried by the breath of the world. One morning, the wind sighed through a cool valley, and the cloud released a single drop of rain. The drop fell gently, gracefully, and for a moment, it thought, "I am me." It was the first thought it had ever had. And in that moment, the raindrop forgot it had once been cloud. It forgot it had never fallen alone. The wind was gone. The sky receded. Only motion remained. The drop passed through layers of air, light bending around. It like glass remembering how to become water. It drifted past bird wings and leaf tips, finally landing on a lotus leaf, resting atop a pond as still as a breath held in meditation. It trembled at first, then it looked around. The pond reflected the sky, wide, unbroken, unthinking. But the raindrop did not see that. It saw only its own shape, clinging to the slick green of the lotus leaf, separate, distinct, trembling. "I am small," it thought. "I must protect myself." It tensed, drew itself tighter, refused to roll into the pond. Frogs croaked in the distance. Dragonflies skimmed the surface. But the drop, caught in its idea of being me, stayed still. And in that stillness, it began to worry. What if I disappear? What if I fall into the pond and am never seen again? Time passed, the sun rose, and with it came warmth. The lotus leaf heated under the light, the air shimmered, and slowly the raindrop began to fade, not into the pond, but into the air. It felt itself thinning. Fearing oblivion, it cried out, not aloud, but inwardly, I don't want to vanish. I want to stay. Just then, a breeze passed. It lifted the drop gently, drawing it upward in the smallest wisp of mist. And in that rise, something stirred. A memory of cloud, of movement, of not being alone. And the drop realized I was never just a drop. I was sky, I was river, I was rain. I was always more than the shape I held. It had not disappeared, it had only returned. And above the pond, somewhere in the silent blue, the clouds smiled without lips, moved without feet, and waited for the next breath to carry it. Zen reflection. This story is the essence of non-self, or anatta, one of the 3 marks of existence in Buddhist philosophy. The raindrop clinging to the lotus leaf mirrors the human mind clinging to identity, to ego, to form. We awaken one day and think, I am me. And with that thought comes separation, anxiety, the terror of disappearance. But Zen does not teach the annihilation of the self. It teaches the transparency of it. As Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, cloud never dies. It becomes rain. It becomes tea. It becomes your breath. The raindrop's fear was not rooted in reality. It was rooted in the illusion that being this shape, this drop, was the only way to exist. But water cannot be lost. It only changes form. So too, in Zen, we are not the forms we inhabit, our roles, names, fears, or desires. We are the awareness that holds all forms. We are the cloud, the rain, the pond. And when we forget ourselves, we remember who we truly are. Psychological reflection. The raindrop's story mirrors the psychological tension between ego identity and expanded awareness. In childhood, we slowly develop a sense of I. This is necessary. It helps us navigate the world, form boundaries, develop autonomy. But over time, the ego becomes rigid. It insists on permanence. I am this. I am not that. The fear of ego dissolution, the fear that I will be lost, irrelevant, or disappear, is one of the deepest anxieties in human consciousness. It manifests in the fear of death, the fear of failure, the fear of insignificance, the obsessive need to be unique or remembered. But in practices like mindfulness and non-dual therapy, we learn that the self is not static. It is process, not product. When clients experience breakthrough moments in therapy, moments of flow, awe, surrender, they often describe them as losing themselves, yet feeling more alive than ever. Like the raindrop, they realize they are not just a drop. They are also the sky. The paradox? The more we try to preserve our fixed identity, the more we suffer, the more we allow ourselves to dissolve into experience, into relationships, into creativity, into presence, the more we expand. We do not vanish. We return. Closing contemplation tonight. Ask, what part of me am I clinging to out of fear? What do I believe will happen if I let go? And is it possible that letting go is not loss, but return? Close your eyes. Picture a single raindrop on a lotus leaf, alone, trembling, Now picture the pond below, still, vast, waiting. Let the drop fall, not with force but with trust. It does not vanish, it becomes the pond. As the Buddha taught, just as the great ocean has but one taste, the taste of salt, so too does this Dharma have but one taste, the taste of liberation. And liberation, like the rain, does not come from clinging. It comes from remembering what you were before you forgot. Story 11. The house that could breathe. At the far edge of a quiet valley, past the rice fields that bent with the wind and the bamboo groves that whispered without mouths, there stood a house. It was not large, not ornate. It had no name etched into its gate, no flag fluttering above its eaves. It stood like an old monk, silent, observant, forgotten. But the villagers called it the house that could breathe. They spoke of it with the kind of reverence usually reserved for temples or stories told by dying elders. Some said the house changed size depending on who stepped inside. Others claimed the walls pulsed gently like lungs, expanding, softening, holding. No one knew who built it, or why it had been abandoned, but no one stayed long inside. Not because it was haunted, but because it made people feel too much. One autumn, a man named Ren came to the village. He was not from nearby. He had walked for 3 days and 3 nights without rest, eyes rimmed with red, hands clenched as if still holding something that had long since slipped away. He carried nothing but a letter folded into quarters and tucked inside his shirt, a letter he could not read without weeping. His voice was low, his posture smaller than his frame. He came not looking for healing, only distance. When he asked for a place to stay, the villagers hesitated. Their homes were full, they said, but someone mentioned the house on the hill. Ren nodded. He did not ask questions. That evening, as the light fell like ash across the valley, Ren climbed the path and entered the house that could breathe. At first, he noticed nothing strange. The air was still. The floorboards creaked. The windows were clean, though no one seemed to tend them. There was a single mat, a kettle, and a small wooden bench. That was all. He sat, and immediately he felt it. The slowness. Not in the house, in himself. His breath, once shallow, dropped into his belly. His shoulders, once high and hard, began to lower, not from will, but from a sensation he could not name, like something ancient inside him had remembered how to exhale. He stayed. 1 night, then 2. He boiled rice, watched the clouds, slept, woke. But by the 3rd night, the quiet began to shift. Not outside. Inside. The silence grew thicker, more insistent, like a question he had avoided too long. It pressed against him. Memories rose, his wife's voice, the hospital room, the beeping machine. The letter he had read once, then folded and hidden, her last words. The grief returned, not sharp, but low, like a tide, and he could not hold it back. He cried, not politely, not quietly. He cried like a child who had been strong too long. When he opened his eyes, the room seemed wider. He felt the walls around him, not enclosing, but holding. The house breathed, and for the first time in years, so did he. The next morning, Ren left the house. He walked down to the village, face streaked with salt, eyes soft. The villagers watched in silence. One asked, "Did the house do something?" He smiled, barely. It listened. Then he turned the letter into ash, not out of rejection, but because he no longer needed the words to remember the love. And the house? It stood, as it always had, breathing, waiting, not to heal, only to make space. Zen reflection. In Zen, the deepest healing often comes not from action, but from space. The house in this story is not magic. It does not speak, chant, or anoint. It does what most of us forget to do. It holds without interfering. As the Zen saying goes, don't just do something. Sit there. Ren, like so many, arrived with pain he could not process, grief he could not express. He did not need advice. He did not need fixing. He needed space that did not contract when he cried. In many Zen temples, the Zendo, the meditation hall, is not decorated. No distractions, no praise, no punishment, only stillness. The house that could breathe is the Zendo of the self. When we become such a space, for ourselves, for others, we learn what true presence means. Not solving, not saving, just staying. Psychological reflection. From a psychological perspective, Ren's experience in the breathing house reflects the principles of trauma-informed safety and nervous system regulation. Many people who experience grief or trauma do not suffer because of the event alone. They suffer because they never had a safe container to process it. When the body is in a chronic state of hypervigilance, fight, flight, or freeze, healing cannot occur. The nervous system must first feel held before it can release. In somatic therapy, we say, the body tells the story when the mouth cannot. Ren's body knew grief, but he had kept it compressed, folded, breathless. The house offered him co-regulation, not from another person, but from an environment that allowed stillness, depth, and non-judgmental presence. This is how many modern therapies now approach trauma, not with talk alone, but with felt safety. That may be a person, a space, a rhythm of breath. In Zen, the breath and the mat are enough. In therapy, sometimes a single room with no expectations becomes the most powerful medicine. Closing contemplation. Ask yourself tonight, do I have a space that allows me to feel without explanation? Have I become a house with no breath, always reacting, always holding in? What would it take to become a space that holds, not tightens? Sit quietly, inhale deeply, let the ribs widen, let the body soften. Then imagine your own inner home, not a perfect one, not clean or ordered, just a place that does not flinch when pain arises. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Tonight you do not need to fix anything. You only need to let the house breathe. And, in doing so, you may remember that you can too. Story 12. The fisherman who cast his net in the sky. On the rugged coast of a forgotten peninsula, where the land ended with no warning and the sea spoke more often than people did, lived a fisherman named Sora. He was known not for his catch, but for his gaze. Every evening, after the boats had returned and the harbour bells had quieted, Sora would walk to the edge of the cliffs and stare into the sky, not to pray, not to dream, but as if searching for something that no one else could see. He fished, yes, but not from the sea. He cast his net into the sky. It was not a metaphor, it was not madness. He truly did. Each dusk, Sora would take his small mended net, the kind used for squid or mackerel, and toss it high into the air. The villagers laughed at first. Has he forgotten what lives in water? Perhaps he hopes to catch stars. But Sora said nothing. He would cast, then slowly gather the empty net, fold it with reverence, and sit quietly as the sun dissolved into the sea. Years passed. Children grew. Elders died. Boats changed shape. Names were forgotten. But Sora remained, casting into the sky. Until one spring, a great storm came. The kind that tore roofs from temples and left boats splintered along the bay. The sea surged like grief unspoken, and when the wind finally slept, Sora was gone. They found his hut intact, his nets folded, his coat still damp by the hearth, but no trace of him. The village mourned, quietly, respectfully, without question. Some said he had been taken by the gods, others, that he had walked into the ocean to become a part of the horizon he loved. But one girl, young, observant, the daughter of a weaver, said something different. He caught it, she whispered. Caught what? They asked. The thing he was waiting for. They laughed, but gently. She was only a child. That night she walked alone to the cliff's edge, net in hand. She cast it upward, not to catch, but to understand. And for the briefest moment, in the hush between waves, in the hush between heartbeats, she felt it. The net trembled, not with weight, but with presence. She smiled, folded the net, sat down, and began to wait. Not for fish, not for stars, but for the moment when longing and stillness became the same thing. Zen reflection. The image of casting a net into the sky is the heart of Zen longing, the paradox of seeking, that which cannot be possessed, of reaching not to grasp, but to surrender. Sora's act was not madness. It was devotion without object. He did not need to catch anything. The casting was enough. As the Zen saying goes, the search is the obstacle. Only the searchless find. Zen does not condemn longing. It asks that we turn longing inward, not as desire for results, but as intimacy with the present moment. Sora startuais cast his net into the sky, not to bring something down, but to lift something within, to live without guarantees, to wait without demand, to hope without clinging. That is the essence of Zen. Psychological reflection. Modern psychology often views longing as a symptom of absence, of unmet needs, of unresolved trauma, and often it is. But there is a more subtle form of longing, the kind that is existential, tender, creative. This is not the longing for possession. It is the longing for wholeness, for something unnamed, a return, a quiet integration. Carl Jung spoke of this as the search for individuation, the lifelong journey toward becoming one's full, undivided self. But what happens when the object of our search is not tangible? When we cannot define what is missing, only that something aches? We may be tempted to numb it, distract it, pathologize it. But Sora did something different. He honored it. Each night, he offered his ritual, casting a net into a space that would never catch, and in doing so, he made peace with uncertainty. He gave his longing a rhythm, a shape, a silence. In acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, this is called values-based action, living in alignment with your deepest intentions, even when no outcome is promised. Sora's casting was a values act, not because it worked, but because it mattered. And in that, healing begins. Closing contemplation. Ask yourself, what sky have I been casting my net into? What am I hoping to catch? And do I even know what it looks like? Can I learn to live with the ache without needing it to resolve? Tonight, imagine yourself at the cliff's edge, the sky above, the sea below, the breath between. Cast your net, whatever that means to you. A word, a prayer, a song, a silence. Let it rise, let it fall. Fold it gently and sit, as the Buddha said. Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. And sometimes that word is never spoken. It is simply lived. Cast the net and let the sky catch you. Story 13. The dog that chased its shadow. In a quiet village ringed by dusty roads and rice paddies that rippled like sleep, there lived a dog named Moro. He had no master, no collar, no place to return to at dusk. He wandered freely, neither feared nor owned, and the villagers let him be. Children offered scraps. Monks nodded gently when he passed. He did not bark, he did not beg, but he chased, not rabbits, not carts, his own shadow. It began one morning in early spring. The rains had stopped, and the sun rose strong above the village, casting everything into sharp relief. Moro, still damp from the night, stretched in the courtyard of the temple. As he stood, he noticed, on the stone beneath him, a shape that moved when he moved. Curious, he stepped forward. The shape followed. He turned. It turned. He crouched. It crouched. Then, with a sudden burst of wild energy, he leapt, teeth bared, paws forward, and tried to bite the shape beneath him. He snapped at it again and again, but it never broke. The monks laughed gently. He has met himself, but Moro did not stop. From that day, wherever the light was strong enough, he chased his shadow, through alleyways, across streams, even in circles under banyan trees. Some days he grew tired, collapsed, and panted in frustration. But the next time the sun returned, so did his chase. Seasons passed. Children grew. Monks aged. Rice turned golden, then bare again, and still Moro chased, until one day clouds blanketed the sky. The light dulled. Shadows vanished. Moro stood in the center of the temple courtyard, turning in circles. Nothing followed him. He paused, sat, and for the first time in years, perhaps ever, he simply looked up. He watched the clouds, slow and unbothered. He listened to the wind move through pine branches. He smelled incense from the meditation hall, and something inside him softened. He lay down and did not move. Even when the sun returned the next day, even when the shadows danced, around him he did not chase, he only watched. And the monks, seeing this, said, "Ah, now he has become the Buddha of the courtyard." Zen reflection. The image of a dog chasing its shadow is a perfect metaphor for the deluded mind, chasing after what it cannot grasp, running in circles, mistaking reflection for reality. In Zen, we call this illusion of self, Atman in Hindu philosophy, refuted in Buddhism by the teaching of anatta, or non-self. The more we chase what we believe we are, our thoughts, our past, our image, the more we suffer. Moro's shadow was never the problem. His relationship to it was. He believed it to be something separate, something to conquer, to outrun, to bite. But the shadow, like the ego, like thought itself, has no substance. As Zen master Huang Po said, the mind that seeks is the mind that suffers. Moro did not find peace by catching his shadow. He found it by noticing its absence. And in that pause, he saw what had always been around him. Sky, wind, incense, breath. This is the essence of Zen practice. We do not fix the mind. We stop chasing its projections. We sit, we return, we observe, and we realize that freedom was never far, only overlooked. Psychological reflection. Moro's relentless pursuit mirrors the human tendency toward rumination, identity attachment, and the chronic search for control. In psychology, this behavior often manifests as obsessing over past mistakes, trying to perfect one's self-image, constantly comparing oneself to others, replaying scenarios that have already ended. These behaviors are like chasing shadows, repetitive, exhausting, ultimately futile. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, teaches us to identify these patterns. But deeper still, practices like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, show us how to let the thoughts be without engagement. Just as Moro sat when the shadow disappeared, we are invited to pause when our mind's projections become too loud. Stop chasing. Notice the present. Let go of the need to resolve every internal tension. When we cease to chase, what remains? Often a quiet clarity, a deeper self, not as an idea, but as presence. Closing, contemplation. Tonight, reflect gently. What am I chasing that cannot be caught? What identity or story follows me wherever I go? What would happen if, just for a breath, I stop running? Close your eyes. Picture a dog under the afternoon sun, panting, pacing, chasing what cannot be bitten. Then picture him beneath a cloudy sky, still, alert, breathing. Now imagine yourself as that dog. Can you pause? Can you be with the sky, the wind, the earth, without needing to conquer the shadow? As the Buddha taught, just as a flame blown by the wind goes out and cannot be called back, so is the life of one who chases illusion. Let the illusion pass. Let the shadow be. Sit in the courtyard of your own being and become still enough to notice what does not move. Story 14. The tree that bowed to the axe. In the forest of Amarui, where the mist slept between the roots and time softened its voice to a hush, there once stood a tree unlike the others. It was tall, but not proud. Its bark was smooth but lined with age. It curved slightly near its base, as if bowing, not from wind, but from memory. The villagers called it Hosha, meaning the listening one. Travelers would rest beneath its shade. Woodcutters sharpened their blades nearby, but always walked around it. Monks placed pebbles at its base as offerings, though they never claimed it as sacred. No one planted Hosha. No one could recall a time when it was not there. One summer, a man named Dayan arrived in the village. He had walked for days, fleeing a city that had broken his spirit. Once a craftsman, his hands had shaped wood into altars, bowls, flutes. But grief had turned his skill to silence. His wife had died the previous winter, and with her went the last thing that gave his work meaning. Dayan came not seeking healing, but numbness. He asked the village elder if there was any work. The elder looked him over, saw the sunken eyes, the restless fingers, and nodded. There's wood to be cleared beyond the stream. Trees too old or crooked to be used for homes. You can keep what you cut. Dayan thanked him and began the next morning. He worked quickly, almost angrily, axe biting bark, branches cracking, each strike a distraction. Sweat replaced tears. The rhythm of chopping became his only prayer. Then, one day, he came to Hosha. It stood alone in a clearing, surrounded by stones and stillness. Birds rested on its limbs. Wind rustled its leaves like whispered lullabies. Dian did not know the name of the tree. He saw only that it curved oddly and might fetch good wood. He raised his axe. Then something happened. The tree bent. Not by force, it bowed, gently, as if greeting him. Dian froze. Not from fear, but from recognition. He had seen this once, long ago, when his wife bowed before stepping into the temple to light a candle, a gesture of reverence, of surrender. Tears rose, uninvited. His hands trembled. He lowered the axe, then fell to his knees. The silence of the forest deepened. Dian stayed, like that for hours, and when he rose, he did not cut the tree. He placed his axe at its roots, whispered, "Thank you," and walked back to the village, empty-handed, but not hollow. Years passed. Dian never returned to woodworking. Instead, he began to teach. Not skills, but slowness. He showed the children how to listen to grain patterns, how to carve without force, how to bow before the wood as if it were a living thing, which he said it still was. He never spoke of Hosha, but each season he walked alone into the forest and bowed, not to pray, but to remember. That grief does not need to be overcome, only honored. Zen reflection. The tree that bowed to the axe offers one of the deepest Zen lessons, the power of surrender that is not defeat, but dignity. In the West, surrender often carries connotations of loss, failure, giving up. But in Zen, surrender is return. It is the act of bowing to what is, not because we are weak, but because we are wise enough to stop resisting what we cannot change. As Dogen Zenji wrote, to bow is to express the oneness of self and others. Bowing is a vertical expression of wholeness. When Hosha bowed, it did not plead. It did not fight. It acknowledged Dian's suffering without absorbing it. It offered presence. And in that moment, Dian remembered, not just his wife, but the part of himself that knew how to feel without breaking. The axe was not dropped because of magic. It was dropped because the heart was met, not opposed. This is the secret of Zen compassion, meeting pain without trying to fix it. Honoring life without needing to control it. To bow truly is to say, I am here, I accept, and I continue. Psychological reflection in therapeutic terms, this story touches the essence of grief integration and somatic release. Dian had not processed his loss. Like many, he coped through action, cutting, moving, numbing. In psychology, this is called avoidant grief. The mind seeks distraction rather than presence because the pain feels unbearable. But the body remembers. When he encountered Hosha, the symbolic bough of the tree bypassed his defenses. It was a non-verbal invitation, a gesture, not a demand. The bowed shape mirrored his inner state. In somatic therapy, this is called resonance. When an external cue matches our internal emotional landscape, allowing locked emotion to surface safely. Dian wept, not because the tree was sacred, but because it held space without judgment. This is how trauma-informed presence works in therapy. No pushing, no fixing, just attunement. Healing begins, not with getting over something, but by bowing to the truth of what happened. Grief doesn't need solving. It needs witnessing. Closing contemplation tonight. Reflect softly. What am I still swinging my inner axe at? A memory, a regret, a loss. What in my life has bent gently toward me, and I've not noticed? What would happen if, instead of resisting, I bowed? Close your eyes. Picture yourself in a forest. Before you stands a tall, silent tree, not commanding, just present. It bows, not in fear, not in submission, but in recognition. Bow back, say nothing, and notice how something inside you softens. As the Buddha taught, with gentleness, overcome anger, with generosity, overcome meanness, with truth, overcome deceit, and with surrender, overcome the illusion that you must bear it all alone. Bow. And in that bow let grief rise, let the axe fall, let your heart return to the forest of its own knowing. Story 15. The wind that asked for directions. Once, in the high reaches between mountains where maps curled at the edges and travellers walked by instinct, there blew a wind that did not know where it was going. Unlike other winds, bold ones, that raced between canyons, or lazy ones that drifted through valleys, this wind wandered in circles. It would gather speed, then pause, turn east, then hesitate and turn west. It brushed trees, stirred grasses, lifted dust, but always uncertain, always returning. The crows in the pine trees cawed. It is a young wind, still learning. The poetic stones whispered, "It carries too many voices." And the monks, who lived near the cliffs, simply said, "It is asking." Indeed it was. Every day the wind would whisper to leaves, "Where should I go?" It would hum into cracks in the rocks, "What is the right direction?" And it would sigh into temple bells, "What am I meant to do?" But the leaves only rustled, the rocks only echoed, and the bells, struck by its breath, only chimed. No answer. Below the cliffs, in a crumbling hut shaped more like a forgotten memory than a home, lived a woman named Yumi. She was old in body, but her eyes held no wrinkles. They had seen too much and released too much to harden. She had once been a teacher, then a wanderer, then something softer, someone who no longer introduced herself by what she did. Now she kept bees, boiled herbs, watched the sky. That morning, as the sun cut gold lines through the clouds, the uncertain wind arrived at her hut. It stirred the curtains. It lifted the pages of her worn book. It danced around her teacup, hoping to be noticed. Yumi looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "Ah, you've come again." The wind pulsed in reply. She poured a second cup of tea and placed it beside her. "Rest a while," she said. And though the wind had never stopped moving, that morning it settled. Not as stillness, but as presence. They sat in silence. A woman. Wind, neither needing to be understood. After some time, the wind whispered, not in words, but in movement. "I do not know where to go." Yumi stirred her tea, then replied, "You are wind. You do not go. You become." The wind hesitated. "But what if I become nothing?" Yumi's smile did not falter. "Then you will be where nothing is needed." "But what if I am wrong?" "Then you will turn." Wind always can. "But what if no one notices me?" She looked up. "I noticed you." The wind paused, and for the first time in its life, it did not rush away. It simply remained. Over the weeks that followed, the wind returned, often, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always asking less. Instead of directions, it carried petals. Instead of questions, it gathered scents. And one day, It stopped outside Yumi's hut and did not enter. It hovered, waited, then moved on, not with urgency, but with clarity, through valleys, over rivers, into the sails of a boat whose captain had been waiting for a favourable breeze. And as it filled the sails, the crew cheered. At last! The wind has arrived! But the wind no longer needed to be thanked. It had stopped asking, because it had learned. Direction is not something found, it is something lived. Zen reflection. The wind that asked for directions is the embodiment of the seeking mind, the aspect of consciousness that constantly wonders. Am I doing this right? Is this the path? Should I turn back? In Zen, such questions are natural, but clinging to them becomes a hindrance. As Zen master Seung San said, "Don't know mind is the true mind." This doesn't mean we wander aimlessly, but that we stop demanding certainty from life. Because certainty is a form of control, and control is the root of suffering. Yumi's response to the wind is not instructive, it is reflective. She offers presence, not a map. She does not point the way. She holds space until the wind remembers it already knows how to move. In Zen, the answer often arises not from explanation, but from companionship. A cup of tea, a quiet moment, a question unanswered. The wind's clarity did not come from getting an answer. It came from being received. Psychological reflection. The story reflects a common struggle in human psychology, directional anxiety. This is the state of chronic uncertainty, indecision, or fear of choosing the wrong path. It manifests in career paralysis, relationship hesitation, creative block, spiritual seeking without grounding. At its core, directional anxiety stems from a fear of loss of time, self-worth, identity. But modern therapeutic models, especially existential therapy and ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, remind us meaning is not found before action. It is found through action. Just as the wind gained clarity by moving, not planning, so must we risk forward motion without perfect assurance. Yumi's presence symbolizes the secure base in attachment theory, the relational anchor that allows safe exploration. For many, therapy offers this. For some, it's a person. For others, it is a spiritual practice. But always, clarity emerges not from answers, but from being accompanied in the asking. Closing contemplation. Tonight reflect. What am I waiting to be sure of? Before I act? Who or what have I been asking for permission to move? Can I allow uncertainty to be part of my direction, not an obstacle to it? Close your eyes. Feel the wind, not outside, but inside, the restless breeze of indecision, the current of questions. Now sit beside it, offer it tea, say nothing, and listen, not for instructions, but for when the wind becomes still enough to hear itself. As the Buddha taught, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart, and the heart, like the wind, does not need a map, only the courage to move. Story 16. The monk who swept his footsteps. In a small monastery nestled against the misty folds of an old mountain range, where pine needles carpeted the ground and bells chimed only when the wind remembered them, there lived a monk known simply as Shin. He was neither abbot nor novice. He had no title. No one quite knew when he had arrived, only that he was always there, in the background, like a shadow that neither demanded light nor feared it. Each morning, long before the others stirred, Shin would take a broom woven from twigs and begin sweeping the monastery paths. He moved slowly, not from age, but from intention, as though each stroke of the broom could calm the world one breath at a time. But he swept differently from the others. He swept backwards. He would start at the gate and move inward, facing the direction he had come from, brushing away each of his footprints as he went. At first, the other monks thought it odd. Why not clear the path ahead? They asked. But Shin only bowed, smiling gently, so they let him be. Years passed. Shin's ritual never changed. Whether snow fell or blossoms drifted, he would sweep, erasing the marks his feet had made. Children from the village would sneak up to watch, giggling, then run across the path, leaving new prints behind him. He never scolded them. He simply swept again, humming softly. Then one day, a young monk named Ritsu, newly ordained and freshly burdened with questions, approached Shin after morning zazen. "May I walk with you?" he asked. Shin nodded. They walked in silence. The path was damp with dew, and each step left a dark impression. Shin began sweeping, gently pulling the broom behind him. Ritsu could not contain his curiosity. "Why do you erase your footsteps?" Shin paused, looked at the trail behind him, and said, "Because I am not where I was." Ritsu frowned. "But we must leave a path for others to follow." Shin smiled. "Do we? Or must we learn to walk without needing proof that we belong?" They continued walking. Then Shin added, "Each morning, I forget who I was yesterday. Not because I dishonor him, but because he no longer walks this path." Ritsu didn't understand then, but he stayed close to Shin in the years that followed, and slowly, he too began to sweep. Not the dust, but the self he no longer needed. Zen reflection in Zen, the practice of sweeping is more than cleaning. It is mindfulness in motion, a way of engaging with impermanence through simple, embodied ritual. Shin's act of erasing his own footsteps is a living koan, a paradox that invites awakening. As the Heart Sutra teaches, form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. Each footprint is a moment of identity. I was here. I mattered. But Zen asks, can you matter without leaving marks? Shin is not hiding. He is letting go of attachment to identity, legacy, even memory. In Zen monasteries, monks sweep after each activity, not to tidy, but to return to presence, to brush away clinging to what just occurred. Shin's sweeping says, I was here, yes, but I no longer need to be. It is not erasure, it is freedom from fixation. Psychological reflection. Shin's ritual resonates with the psychological process of non-attachment to identity, an idea deeply explored in narrative therapy, ACT, acceptance, and commitment therapy, and mindfulness-based practices. Modern psychology recognizes that suffering often arises not just from events, but from the stories we tell about them. I am the person who failed. I am the one who was abandoned. I must prove I am worthy by leaving a legacy. These self-concepts become footprints we desperately protect, even when they no longer serve us. Shin's sweeping is a form of cognitive diffusion, the practice of noticing thoughts and identities without becoming entangled in them. Each stroke of the broom says, that moment is gone. That version of me is no longer here. I begin again. In trauma recovery, this principle is key. Honoring the past, but not identifying with it. We do not erase history. We stop carving it into ourselves. Closing contemplation. Ask yourself tonight, what footprints am I still standing in long after I've moved on? What parts of myself do I keep repeating? Not because they are true, but because they are familiar. What would it feel like to gently sweep them away? Close your eyes. Picture a path, perhaps of sand or stone or snow. See the impressions of your steps. Then picture yourself, broom in hand, walking backwards, lightly, lovingly brushing away each print, not in shame, but in liberation. Let the path behind you soften. Let the horizon ahead remain unknown as the Buddha said, "With our thoughts, we make the world. To purify our thoughts is to see clearly. You are not who you were yesterday, nor who you will be tomorrow. You are the one sweeping, awake, breathing, free. Let that be enough. And walk on." Story 17. The Girl Who Danced with the Mirror. There was once a girl named Kana who lived in a house full of mirrors. Her mother had been a performer, a dancer who believed that beauty could only be measured by reflection. Every wall in their home shimmered with glass, framed in gold or silver, some so tall they seemed like doors into other worlds. From a young age, Kana learned to dance. She was graceful, not just in movement, but in poise. Her feet remembered rhythm better than her mind remembered stories. Her arms painted arcs in the air like brushstrokes across water, and she was always being watched by her reflection, by herself. When she smiled, 100 Kana smiled back. When she faltered, 100 versions of her bore witness. If she cried, she would do so in corners, where the mirrors could not see. Her mother praised her posture, her elegance, her timing, but never her joy, because joy in their home was measured by symmetry, by how close you came to perfection. And so Kana danced, for hours, for years, for mirrors. On her 18th birthday, her mother passed away. Quietly, without spectacle. The house did not mourn, the mirrors remained. Kana continued to dance, but something had shifted. The movements, once light and fluid, now carried the weight of watching herself too long. Her gaze dulled, her limbs moved, but her breath did not follow. One night, as the moon spread a pale shawl across the floorboards, Kana stood at the center of the mirrored hall. She moved, slowly at first, then with growing intensity. She leapt, spun, fell, caught herself, again and again. But each time, the mirrors responded with perfect emotionless copies. She screamed, not with anger, but with despair, and the reflections screamed with her. Then silence, breath, stillness. And in that stillness, she saw something she hadn't seen before. One mirror, slightly cracked near the bottom. A small fracture. She approached it, looked into her eyes, and said, "You don't have to be perfect." Her reflection didn't nod. It didn't resist. It simply stayed. And for the first time, she danced not for mirrors, not for approval. She danced for the feeling of wind against her skin, the ache in her arches, the freedom in imbalance. When she stopped, sweat dripping, heart racing, the mirror didn't speak, but she did. "I'm still here." In the days that followed, Kana began covering the mirrors one by one, not in anger, but in kindness. She left only one uncovered, the cracked one, and each morning she stood before it, bowed and whispered, "May I dance to feel, not to please." Zen reflection, Kana's story, is a powerful reflection of the Zen teaching on non-attachment to form. In the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha said, "All conditioned phenomena are like a dream, an illusion, a bubble, a shadow." The mirrors in Kana's home represent the world of form, appearance, expectation, identity constructed from reflection. We are raised in a world that mirrors us constantly through praise, comparison, judgment, and image. Over time, we begin to dance not from within, but in response to what we see. Zen asks us to stop performing, to bow to the mirror, but not to live for it. Kana's cracked mirror is a koan, a paradoxical gate through which we enter wisdom. It is through the imperfection that she finds truth. True liberation is not to destroy the mirror. It is to see through it. Psychological reflection, Kana's journey mirrors the experience of identity formation under constant external evaluation, a common cause of psychological distress, especially in people raised in high-performance or appearance-focused environments. This can lead to perfectionism, body image issues, performance-based self-worth chronic anxiety, over-approval. Psychologist Carl Rogers spoke of the conditions of worth, the idea that many people learn they are lovable only when they meet certain criteria. Kana was taught to love herself through the mirror. But therapy, especially self-compassion and inner child work, encourages us to unlearn this. The act of covering the mirrors is symbolic of self-directed boundaries, choosing what kind of reflection you allow in your life. Leaving the cracked mirror visible is radical. It says, I accept my flaws. I accept my humanity. I can witness myself without needing to perform. This is how healing begins, not by removing the mirror, but by choosing which reflection becomes your truth. Closing contemplation tonight. Ask yourself, what mirrors have I been dancing for? Whose approval still defines the rhythm of my movement? What would it feel like to dance, write, speak, love, for no one but myself? Close your eyes. Picture a grand hall filled with mirrors, each one reflecting a version of you, younger, older, trying, pleasing. Now walk forward. Place your palm on one. It's cracked, and yet you see yourself more clearly here than in all the others. Bow and whisper, I am not what others see. I am not what I perform. I am the one who moves, even when no one watches. Let that be your dance, not for applause, but for freedom. Story 18. The Boy Who Returned the Rain. In a dry village where the earth cracked from thirst and the wells echoed with absence, there lived a boy named Nari. The village had not seen rain in years. Crops wilted before harvest. The riverbed was a skeleton of its former self. Pale stones and brittle weeds where fish once danced. People prayed. They dug deeper wells. They offered rice at shrines. They blamed karma, politics, the wind. But the sky remained silent. And so did Nari. He was the child of silence. Born during the last rainfall, on the very night thunder rolled like a drum and villagers rushed outside, faces turned upward in joy. His mother used to say, You were born from the sky's tears, but she, like the rain, had left too soon. Nari rarely spoke. He watched, listened, and when he felt most alone, he would walk beyond the village to a large flat stone near the edge of the parched forest. There, he would place a bowl of water, not to drink, but to return. Each evening, he'd fill the bowl with water from the well, what little they had, and leave it on the stone. He would sit beside it until the stars blinked awake. Some called it foolish. Some whispered, He's trying to feed the sky. But he never answered. And each morning, the bowl was empty. Evaporation, they said. But Nari believed otherwise. One night, when the moon was a silver hook catching clouds, a traveller arrived. Old, lean, with eyes like quiet lanterns, he wore robes the colour of ash and walked as though the wind moved through him rather than around. He saw Nari with the bowl, watched him sit, still as stone, and after a time asked, "Why do you offer water to the sky?" Nari looked up. His voice was soft, like wind through reeds. "Because I took from it. Now I return." The traveller sat beside him. "But you were only a child." "You took nothing," Nari replied. "I breathe. I live. That is enough." The traveller closed his eyes and smiled. "You are already a monk," he said. That night they sat together until the moon slept, and in the morning, for the first time in years, a cloud lingered above the village. Small, soft, but full. The elders noticed, children pointed. Nari said nothing. He simply walked to the stone, poured another bowl, and whispered, "Thank you." The cloud returned the next day, and the next. Then more clouds came, and one evening, without thunder, without warning, rain fell. Not a storm, not a flood, just a gentle weeping from the sky. People ran outside, laughing, dancing. But Nari? He stood, still, face tilted upward, palms open, as if to say, "This was never mine, and yet I receive it." Zen reflection, Nari's offering of water to the sky, embodies one of Zen's most subtle teachings, gratitude without ownership. As the Dhammapada teaches, drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise man, gathering little by little, fills himself with good. In Zen, we do not act to cause, we act to connect, to express our place within the web of impermanence, giving not because it will return, but because it must be given. Nari's ritual was not a prayer, it was a gesture, reminder that we belong not above the world, but within it. By offering back what little he had, he stepped out of scarcity and into relationship. Rain may have come, or not, but the transformation had already occurred within him. Psychological reflection. Nari's behavior reflects a healing, practice often overlooked in modern mental health. Symbolic restitution. This is the process of offering something, time, presence, gesture, to repair an internal sense of imbalance, especially when no practical repair is possible. People who carry survivor's guilt, climate grief, or existential burden often experience a longing to give back to life, even if they didn't directly take anything. This is not pathology. It is a soul's yearning for reciprocity. Nari's bowl of water was a microact of restoration. By returning something precious, he honored the source, the sky, life, breath. In trauma recovery, rituals like this can help shift identity from victimhood to agency. Writing letters. Never sent, planting trees for the lost, lighting candles for unnamed grief. The act is small, but the meaning is deep, and in that depth, healing takes root. Closing contemplation tonight. Ask yourself, what have I received that I have never thanked? What small offering can I return? Not for reward, but for relationship. What part of me still believes I must earn the right to exist? Close your eyes. Picture a dry land. You carry a single bowl of water, barely enough, and yet you place it on the earth. You do not ask, you do not expect. You simply offer. As the Buddha said, if you light a lamp for someone else, it will also brighten your path. Tonight, light your lamp, pour your bowl, return your rain, and feel yourself not redeemed, but rejoined. Story 19. The Man Who Replied with Silence. There once lived a man named Joran, who had learned to speak from books, not from people. He was not unkind, nor withdrawn. He simply loved words too much, the way they fit together like puzzle pieces, the way a well-placed phrase could still a room or stir a heart. He studied them, he wrote them, he carried notebooks full of them, but he did not trust silence. To him, silence was absence of thought, of intelligence, of meaning. It was the space between wisdom, not the wisdom itself. So he filled every gap. When someone cried, he offered verses. When someone doubted, he quoted sutras. When someone paused, he rushed in to complete the thought, to offer explanation, comfort, conclusion. They called him learned, they called him sharp, but no one called him peaceful. One winter, after many years of teaching, Joran began to feel a quiet ache in his chest. Not physical, emotional, not loud, constant. He could not name it. He tried writing it out, scripting his own feelings, describing his own thoughts, but the ache remained, so he sought a teacher. Far away, across frozen fields and forgotten shrines, there lived a Zen master, known only as Haru. Haru spoke little. In fact, many who travelled to him returned disappointed, saying, "He didn't answer my question." Still, Joran was determined. He arrived at the monastery one snowy morning, bowing low before the master. "I've read the sutras, I've studied the words, but I cannot quiet this ache in me." Master Haru looked at him, not with curiosity, not with pity, but with stillness. Joran continued, "Please, tell me what I'm missing. Explain it." Silence. Joran frowned. "What should I do?" More silence. Frustrated, he began listing what he had read, what he had taught, what he had suffered. He spoke for nearly an hour. When he finished, breath shallow, Master Haru pointed to the fire between them and said, "Add wood." Joran, confused, did as he was told. They sat. The flames crackled. Then Haru poured him tea. Still not a word, just warmth, steam, breathing. Eventually, something in Joran softened, not in his mind, but in his chest. He did not speak again that day, and for the first time in decades, he did not need to. Joran stayed a week. Each morning, he swept the steps. Each evening, he sat with Haru in silence. No instruction, no conversation, just presence. On the final day, as he packed to leave, Haru finally spoke. "When you cannot name the ache, let it name you." Joran bowed, and for once, replied with nothing at all. Zen reflection. Joran's story is the quiet unfolding of one of Zen's deepest truths. That silence is not the absence of wisdom, it is its container. As Lao Tzu said, silence is a source of great strength. In Zen tradition, the highest teachings are often delivered in silence. A raised finger, a tap on the shoulder, a pause. Why? Because the mind addicted to explanation can never taste what lies beyond it. Joran sought relief through expression, but the ache was not something to be explained. It was something to be sat with. The Buddha, when asked the deepest metaphysical questions, often responded with noble silence, not because he lacked answers, but because the question itself was based in delusion. Master Haru did not teach Joran by word, he taught him by fire, by tea, by breath, by asking for wood not reasons. This is Zen transmission, mind to mind, without language. Psychological reflection, Joran's journey mirrors a common modern struggle: over-verbalization as avoidance. In therapy, clients sometimes speak in long loops, interpreting, analyzing, explaining, as a defense mechanism against feeling. This is especially true for those trained in intellectual pursuits. Words become shields. Insight replaces vulnerability. But as somatic psychologists teach, the body knows what the mind denies. Joran's ache was not a lack of understanding. It was a lack of presence with his own emotion. Master Haru offered co-regulation, not interpretation. By sitting with Joran, without pressure or performance, he created a safe space where the nervous system could downshift, where the heart could catch up with the intellect. Silence became the medicine. In internal family systems, IFS, or polyvagal theory, this would be called holding space, not doing, not fixing, but being. And in that space, integration happens, without a single word. Closing contemplation tonight, ask yourself, when was the last time I sat in silence, not as emptiness, but as presence? What ache in me am I still trying to explain away? Who might I become if I allowed silence to answer for me? Close your eyes. Imagine yourself sitting across from someone. No words, no urgency, just breath, a fire between you, and slowly, the ache in your chest begins to speak, not in language, but in knowing. Let it rise. Let it warm, and do not reply, as the Zen proverb says. Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. Tonight, sit with your ache, offer it tea, feed its fire, and, when it grows quiet, thank it with your silence. Story 20. The Bell That Rang Once a Year. In the quiet mountains of the east, where mists walked the ridges before the monks did, there stood a temple named Senzui, the garden without fences. It was known not for its size nor its history, but for a single ritual that had puzzled many and moved a few. At Senzui, there was a great bronze bell suspended beneath a wooden pavilion, ornate, solemn, green with age. But unlike other temples where bells rang with the rising sun or marked hours of meditation, the bell at Senzui rang only once a year. Not on New Year's Day, not on a holy festival, but on a day chosen in silence, without announcement, without preparation, and no one knew when that day would come, not even the monks themselves. People would ask, "Why so rarely?" And the abbot would smile softly and answer, "Because if it rang every day, no one would truly hear it." Pilgrims came and went. Some waited for weeks, hoping to witness the moment. Some grew frustrated and left, muttering, "This bell is useless." But once in a while, someone would stay, not for the bell, but for the stillness it required. They would sit beneath the pavilion, sweep its floor, watch the wind move. And then, one morning, just when the birds were too tired to sing, and the mist had begun to rise in ribbons through the trees, the bell would ring. A single deep sound, not loud, not hurried, but complete. And for those who heard it, time stood still. One year, a young woman named Mai arrived at Senzui. She had come not for the bell, but for rest. Her life had been a long river of responsibility. First a daughter, then a sister, then a wife, then a caretaker. Somewhere in the current, she had lost her name. Her husband had passed the winter before. Her children were grown. She had no one to report to. So she came to the mountains. She didn't ask about the bell. She asked for a place to sit. The monks gave her a stool near the garden and a cup of barley tea. She stayed. A day passed, then 3, then 10. She did not speak much. She walked. She breathed. She swept the leaves around the bell pavilion. One morning, after 33 days of silence, she stood beneath the bell and whispered, "If you wish to ring, I am ready." She did not expect a reply, and none came. But 2 mornings later, just before dawn, the bell rang. Once, and the sound, deep and slow, moved through her chest like a hand gently pushing her heart open. She did not cry. She did not speak. She simply bowed and smiled. The kind of smile that comes not from happiness, but from returning. She left the next day without telling anyone, but the monks noticed. The stool by the garden remained empty, and the leaves around the pavilion were already swept. Zen reflection. The bell at Senzui teaches the Zen principle of rare presence, the practice of valuing what is fleeting precisely because it is fleeting. As the Buddha said in the Udana, transient are all conditioned things. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. In a world that prizes repetition, predictability, and control, Senzui's bell is a rebellion. It rings not when summoned, but when conditions are right, like insight, like grief, like love. My story reveals what Zen calls shikantaza, just sitting, not waiting for anything, not achieving, just being. And from that being, something deeper arises, not as noise, but as clarity. The bell doesn't make meaning, it reveals it. Psychological reflection. Modern life teaches us that value is tied to frequency, that something must happen often to matter. Constant connection, constant stimulation, constant achievement. But psychology shows otherwise. In mindfulness-based therapy, the most transformative moments often arise during silence, in unexpected insights, unplanned emotions, small shifts, in awareness. The bell at Senzui is an external metaphor for inner readiness. Mai's readiness was not about deserving, it was about finally stopping long enough to hear. In trauma therapy, this is known as earning stillness, not through effort, but through presence. The nervous system, often hypervigilant or numb, gradually becomes safe enough to receive. And then, often in a whisper, a tear, a memory, something rings. Once, and it is enough. Closing. Contemplation tonight. Ask gently, what am I waiting to hear that cannot speak until I grow quiet? What sound in my life have I stopped noticing because it came too often? What if the answer I seek is already waiting, but only when I stop searching? Close your eyes. Picture a bell, not loud, not golden, just still, in a pavilion of wood and air. You sit before it. You do not strike it. You do not beg it to speak. You simply breathe. And one day, maybe today, maybe not, it rings. Once, and as the Zen saying goes, when the bell rings, it does not call, it reminds. Let yourself be reminded of nothing, of everything, of the quiet inside you that was never silent, only waiting to be heard. Story 21. The potter who made empty bowls. In a village hidden between 2 slow rivers and the arms of old mountains, there lived a potter named Sora. He was neither famous nor poor. His house was simple. His hands, shaped by clay, bore the soft scars of fire and labor. Each day, Sora would rise before the sun, draw water from the stream, and sit by his wheel. He did not make vases or teapots, not figurines or tiles. He made bowls, only bowls, and every bowl was empty. Not in the way all bowls are empty before use, but in the way that they were meant to remain that way. He would fire them, glaze them, place them on the ledge outside his shop, and when asked what they were for, he would answer, to hold what cannot be seen. Some thought him eccentric, some thought him wise, but few bought the bowls, and still he made them. One after another, day after day. One spring, a traveller stopped at his shop. She wore a cloak the colour of ink and walked with the posture of one used to carrying invisible weight. She studied the rows of bowls and asked, "What do they do?" Sora smiled and replied, "They receive." The traveller tilted her head. "Receive what?" "Whatever you no longer wish to carry," he said. She laughed. "Like sorrow?" Sora nodded. She picked up a bowl. It was light, smooth, deep enough to cup both hands around, and without ceremony, she sat on the stone bench and whispered into the bowl. "I'm tired of being strong." Sora did not interrupt. The woman whispered again, this time slower. "I miss someone I never got to say goodbye to." And then she placed the bowl down like a small altar of truth. Sora covered it with a cloth and said, "Thank you." She left without buying anything. But something had changed in her posture, in her breath. She walked away a little lighter. The next morning, Sora took the bowl into the forest. He dug a shallow hole and placed it inside. Then he covered it with earth and stones whispering, "May this sorrow rest." He did this often, for travellers, for locals, even for himself. Not to bury pain, but to give it somewhere to go. Zen reflection. Sora's practice reflects one of the quietest truths in Zen, that emptiness is not lack, but readiness, as Lao Tzu wrote in the Tao Te Ching. We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds. In Buddhism, the concept of shunyata, or emptiness, is often misunderstood. It does not mean void or nothingness. It means that everything is interdependent, without a permanent essence. Sora's bowls are not useless. They are containers for what the world does not know how to hold. And like a meditation cushion, or a bell, or the breath, their power lies in their invitation. They ask, "What burden have you carried too long? What truth have you silenced? What would you release if you had somewhere safe to place it?" In Zen, the answer is often not found in teaching, but in holding space. Psychological reflection. Sora's offering mirrors a key practice in trauma-informed therapy: externalization. This is the act of moving internal pain, thoughts, emotions, grief, outside of oneself in order to witness and transform it. In Gestalt therapy, clients speak to a chair as if it were a person. In narrative therapy, they write letters to their younger selves or to the people who hurt them. In somatic therapy, they place their hands where the pain lives and breathe into it. What Sora offers is ritualized externalization, using the bowl as a sacred object to hold grief without judgment, to absorb sorrow with presence instead of pity. By burying the bowl, he does not erase the pain, he honors it, he gives it roots, and in doing so helps others walk forward without erasing where they've been. Closing contemplation tonight, sit quietly and ask yourself, what part of me is heavy? Not because it is mine, but because I've had no place to put it. If I had an empty bowl, what would I whisper into it? Can I create that space for myself or someone else? Close your eyes. Picture your hands. Now, in your hands, imagine a bowl. Round, warm, patient. You do not need to fill it. You only need to place what you've been holding there. A name, a worry, goodbye you never gave. Then gently place the bowl down in your heart, not to bury, but to bless. As the Buddha said, just as the solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame. Let the bowl receive what shakes you. Let the earth hold what you no longer can. And when the morning comes, walk lighter, not because you are empty, but because you now know how to empty. Story 22. The gardener who forgot her garden. There once was a woman named Rin who had the most beautiful garden in the village. It wasn't large, nor was it filled with rare plants, but those who passed by would often stop, drawn in by something they couldn't name, not colour, not fragrance, but a sense of peace. Her garden grew things slowly, simple herbs, climbing beans, moonflowers, and tiny white daisies that never asked to be noticed. Rin had tended the garden for nearly 40 years, not with ambition, but with quiet. She rose early, barefoot in the dew, her breath moving with the wind as she pruned, patted and planted. She rarely spoke, but the earth seemed to understand her, and the garden responded. Then one year, after the long winter had taken her husband, and the frost had crept too deep into her bones, Rin stopped tending the garden, not out of grief, not out of anger, but because something inside her had thinned. Days blurred. The once familiar rituals, boiling tea, sweeping leaves, pressing seeds into soil, became distant memories, like songs half forgotten in the dark. Neighbours noticed. At first they whispered, maybe she needs time. Later, maybe she's lost herself. But Rin simply sat by her window, looking out at what had once grown, now overrun with weeds, dry stalks, and fallen petals. She didn't move to fix it. She just watched and watched, until even the watching faded. One morning, a child wandered by, a boy with knees smudged in dust and pockets full of marbles. He peeked through the crooked fence and frowned. He saw the garden, wild and tangled, and he saw Rin, sitting still. "Did your plants run away?" he asked. Rin blinked, startled. "No," she said after a pause. "I just stopped calling them." The boy nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Then he picked a weed, a dandelion puffball, and blew it gently toward the window. The seeds danced, and Rin smiled. Faintly. That night, she dreamt of her garden, but not as it had been, as it might become. The next day, she stepped outside, not to tend, not to restore, but just to walk. She didn't pull a single weed. She didn't touch the broken trellis. She simply walked between the tangled vines and dry patches, greeting them like old friends, and whispered, "You waited." The next day, she carried a small cup of water and poured it over the roots of a plant she couldn't name. The day after, she knelt and cleared the dead leaves from under the daisies, not all at once, but one gesture at a time. The garden didn't bloom overnight, but neither did she. Both returned quietly, together, like breath remembered. Zen reflection. Rin's story embodies a Zen truth that is both gentle and profound. The path back to life is not to rebuild, but to return. As the Zen master, Dogen once wrote, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things." Rin forgot her garden, yes. But deeper than that, she forgot her role as gardener, and in doing so, she stopped trying to control, restore, or force anything. Zen teaches that forgetting is not always loss. Sometimes it is a release. When we forget who we think we are, we become present to what we actually are, even in decay, even in stillness. Her return to the garden is not an act of productivity. It is an act of belonging, and in that belonging, growth resumes. Psychological reflection Rin's experience resonates with what many in the modern world know as functional freeze. A trauma response where one appears calm or passive, but is internally disconnected from feeling and agency, often seen in those carrying prolonged grief, burnout, or unresolved sorrow. It shows up as forgetting once loved activities, feeling blank or detached, avoiding not out of fear, but numbness. Traditional approaches might try to push one back into action, but healing often begins with gentle re-engagement, like Rin stepping into the garden, not to fix, but to be with. In somatic psychology, this is known as titration, reintroducing connection in small, manageable doses so the body can begin to trust life again. No dramatic transformation, just a single touch, a breath, a step on soil, and over time. These tiny movements stitch together the memory of aliveness. Closing contemplation tonight, ask yourself gently, what garden in me have I stopped tending, not from failure, but from forgetting? What would it look like to walk among the weeds without shame? Can I meet my life where it is, not where it should be? Close your eyes. Picture a garden. Yours. Not as it was, not as it should be, but as it is now. Wild, tangled, still. Step into it. Feel the earth. Touch one leaf. Water one root and say, "You waited." As the Buddha said, with a boundless heart, dwell, pervading the whole world with loving kindness. Let that kindness begin with your forgotten places, your untended self, your soft return. Walk slowly, and remember, it's not too late. The garden hasn't forgotten you. Story 23. The Pilgrim Who Turned Around. In a land where the sky met the sea with no horizon in between, there lived a pilgrim named Anyo. He had walked for years, not from one place to another, but from oneself to another, shedding names, identities, stories, and sorrows along the way. He carried little, a small satchel, a worn robe, a wooden staff polished by time. He had visited temples, mountain caves, sunken forests, and wind-lashed monasteries. He had knelt before teachers with deep eyes and deep silences. He had recited mantras until they became breath, yet something in him remained, unsatisfied. He believed, though he would not say it aloud, that peace lived elsewhere, not here, not now, but just beyond the next peak, the next prayer, the next path, and so he walked. One morning, as the fog lifted like veils from the earth, Anyo came across a crossroads in a quiet field. No signs, no pilgrims, just three paths diverging like fingers pointing into the unknown. He stood, heart beating with old questions. Left, right, straight ahead? He sat down to decide. Hours passed, then without knowing why, he chose the middle path and walked. The air grew thin. The trees grew silent. His thoughts, once rhythmic, began to spiral. He wondered, was this the right way? Should he have chosen the other? The idea grew thorns in his mind, and after half a day's journey, he stopped. He turned around and walked back, not out of fear, not out of regret, but because he had begun to see something. The path was not different. He was, and perhaps that mattered more than where it led. When he returned to the field, an old man was sitting beneath a tree. He wore no robes, carried no staff, and greeted Anyo with a nod. "Turned around, did you?" the old man said. Anyo hesitated. "Yes." "Lost?" "No, not anymore." The old man smiled and said nothing more. They shared dried fruit, watched the birds stitch the sky. Then Anyo stood up, bowed, and took a new path. Not forward, not back, but to the side. A path he had not noticed before. He didn't know where it led, and for once, that felt like enough. Zen reflection. Anyo's journey touches on one of Zen's most liberating paradoxes, that the destination is not the point of the path, presence is. In the Platform Sutra, Huineng said, "No thought, no reflection, no analysis, no cultivation, no intention. Let it settle itself." Zen does not praise the seeker who walks far. It praises the one who realizes there's nowhere to go. In many traditions, pilgrimage is seen as movement towards sacredness. But in Zen, the sacred is not at the mountain's peak or in the teacher's eyes. It is in this step, this breath, this return. Turning around is not failure. It is often the first true step. Because for the first time, we are no longer chasing, we are meeting. Psychological reflection. Anyo's moment of turning around reflects what psychologists call a reframe of agency. The moment when a person stops acting out of compulsion or conditioning and begins acting from choice. In trauma or perfectionism, many feel they must constantly move forward, equating rest or change of direction with failure. But healing often involves pausing, re-evaluating, sometimes even undoing. This process resembles what Carl Jung called individuation, becoming whole by integrating the parts of the self we once left behind. In therapy, this might look like a high achiever stepping away from their career, a caregiver reclaiming time for self, a spiritual seeker. Realizing they are already whole, Anyo's return to the crossroads is a profound metaphor for what many clients experience in midlife, post-burnout, or after deep inner work. Not collapse, not regression, but realignment. Closing contemplation tonight, sit quietly. Ask, where am I walking out of habit, not heart? What would happen if I turned around? Can I trust that the path is not outside me, but me? Close your eyes. Feel your feet on the ground. Picture a fork in the road, not with pressure, but with possibility. You do not need to choose perfectly. You only need to notice you are already here. Let that noticing soften your breath. Let it become a turning, not away, but inward. As the Buddha said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Tonight, wherever you are, you've already arrived. Story 24. The candle that refused to burn. In a small temple carved into the side of a wind-shaped hill, there lived a candle that had never been lit. It rested, undisturbed, at the back of the main altar, behind the lotus statue near the base of the incense stand, cradled in dust and shadow. The monks called it the unburned candle, not out of reverence, but habit. No one remembered when it had been placed there. No one dared throw it away. And so it remained, quiet, untouched, still coated in the faint, waxy scent of something that had never fulfilled its purpose. The other candles, tall, elegant, golden, were lit daily. Their flames flickered during morning chants and shimmered in twilight ceremonies. Their melted stubs were replaced, their wax returned to the earth. But the unburned candle, it stayed whole, perfect, unused, and slowly. It began to believe something, that to remain unlit was to remain pure, that burning, that change would mean destruction, that to be chosen was to be diminished. One day, a novice monk named Ema was sweeping the altar floor when she spotted the candle. She picked it up, turned it in her hands. It was heavier than she expected. Cold. Solid. She asked the elder monk, "Why has this never been used?" The elder shrugged. "Some candles are kept for special occasions. Or perhaps it was simply forgotten." Ema looked at it again. Somehow, she could not bring herself to put it down. That night, during meditation, she placed the unburned candle on a small stone near the garden pond. She sat before it, hands resting on her knees. The moon glowed above. The frogs sang softly from the reeds. The candle sat silently. Ema whispered, "Are you afraid to burn?" And in that silence, she felt something shift inside her. Not in the candle, but in herself. She too had feared change. She too had spent her life trying not to be consumed. But what is a candle for, if not to offer its light? What is a life, for if not to be lived? The next morning she brought the candle to the main hall, lit a single match, and touched its flame to the wick. It took time. The wick hesitated, smoked, curled. Then it caught. A soft yellow glow bloomed into being, trembling, alive, tender. The monks turned. They said nothing, but one by one they sat and meditated in the new light. The candle did not protest. It burned, slowly, gracefully, not with regret, but with relief. Zen reflection. The candle that refused to burn speaks to one of Zen's quietest teachings, that to fulfill our nature, we must surrender to impermanence, as the Heart Sutra reminds us. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. To be lit is to be changed. To give light is to give self. In the West, we often value preservation, of identity, of beauty, of control. But Zen reminds us that life's richness lies in expression, not protection. The candle, in staying unlit, avoided pain, but it also avoided purpose. Once lit, it did not disappear. It became what it always was. As humans, we resist burning. We fear loss, grief, risk, vulnerability. But to love is to burn. To create is to burn. To speak truth is to burn. And in that burning, we glow. Psychological reflection. The unburned candle mirrors what psychology calls self-inhibition, a fear-based defense against vulnerability, action, or exposure. This is common among those who, fear failure or rejection, were raised to avoid mistakes, associate effort with danger. They may live cautiously, never starting projects, never speaking up, never letting themselves feel too deeply. Externally, whole, internally stalled. In internal family systems, IFS therapy, this is called the protector part, the aspect of self that keeps us safe by keeping us small. but healing requires compassionate ignition. Emma did not force the candle. She sat with it, listened, lit it, not to destroy it, but to awaken it. And so, too in healing, we light slowly, we begin gently. We do not set ourselves on fire to be worthy. We burn just enough to remember. We are alive. Closing contemplation tonight, ask softly, what part of me is still hiding, afraid to burn? Have I mistaken safety for peace? If I were a candle, where would I want to offer my light? Close your eyes. Feel your breath like a flame, rising, falling, rising again. Picture yourself as a candle, not tall or ornate, just real, unlit, waiting. Someone kneels beside you. They do not push, they do not plead. They offer a small flame and whisper, "It's time." You do not fear it anymore. You welcome it. As the Buddha said, just as a lamp cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. Let yourself burn, not away, but into who you truly are. Story 25. The drum that no one beat. In the corner of an old monastery, where ivy crept in through the stone and silence fell heavier than dust, there sat a drum. Its body was carved from sacred wood, darkened by time. Its face stretched with deerskin, held taut by handmade nails, smooth from age and weather. No one had touched it in decades, not because it was broken, but because no one dared. It was said to have belonged to the first abbot, a man who never used it during rituals, never struck it during chants, and when asked why he kept a drum that made no sound, he simply answered, "Because silence is the rhythm we keep forgetting." And so the drum remained, intact, untouched. One spring, a new monk arrived, young, curious, unsure of the rules, but reverent of tradition. His name was Kai. He noticed the drum on his first day. It called to him, not with sound, but presence. He asked the elders, "Why don't we play it?" One answered, "Because the one who beats the drum must know the rhythm of silence." Another said, "It plays without hands if you know how to listen." Kai bowed. He did not press further, but every evening, when the monastery quieted and the lanterns dimmed, he sat before the drum, not to play, to listen. At first, he heard only the sound of his own breath, then the wind, then the faint clicking of beetles in the walls. But after many weeks, something strange began to happen. He began to feel the drum pulsing, not with volume, but with life, like an invisible rhythm echoing through its skin. Not sound, but presence. One evening, eyes closed, hands open, he whispered, "You're not silent, are you?" The drum said nothing, but in that nothing, he heard everything. Years passed. Kai became an elder. Still, he never struck the drum, but during ceremonies, he would place it at the center of the meditation hall, and somehow, its presence stilled the room deeper than any chant. Visitors would ask, "Why bring a drum that isn't played?" Kai would smile and say, "It's been playing longer than we've been listening," and some would nod, some would scoff, but a few would stay and learn to hear what no one had to strike. Zen reflection, the drum that no one beat, reveals one of Zen's most elusive yet essential teachings: form without force, sound without strike, presence without performance. As the Zen saying goes, the most beautiful sound is the one that arises from silence. The unplayed drum is not empty. It is full of potential, not in waiting to be used, but in simply being. Zen does not seek to amplify life through noise, effort, or display. It seeks to return us to the pulse that underlies all things. Just as a koan does not require solving but sitting with. The drum reminds us that the deepest truths resonate beyond action. They are felt in stillness. Kai's journey with the drum is the journey of many meditators. First hearing only their breath, then their thoughts, then the world, then nothing. And in that nothing, everything. Psychological reflection. The silent drum mirrors the core of embodied awareness in therapeutic practice, a felt presence that is not triggered by doing, but by being. Modern culture prizes external validation, action, volume, response. The louder the beat, the more attention it draws. But in mindfulness and trauma-informed care, some of the most profound healing occurs in non-verbal resonance. This is called attunement, not advising, not fixing, just being with, like Kai with the drum. He did not force insight. He listened it into being. Many trauma survivors, especially those with attachment wounds, heal not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through safe, quiet presence. Through learning that they do not need to perform to be worthy, that their rhythm, even in stillness, is valid. The drum speaks. To that, it offers a space where nothing is required and everything is welcome. Closing contemplation. And now, we reach the end of this series, not with a bang, not with a final beat, but with a breath, a silence that echoes longer than words. So, tonight, ask with tenderness, where in my life have I mistaken silence for absence? Can I feel the rhythm of what is, even if it makes no sound? What would happen if I stopped trying to strike and simply listened? Close your eyes. Picture a drum. Ancient, whole, unplayed. It sits before you. You rest your hands on your lap. You breathe and you feel it, a pulse, a thrum, a presence. It was never waiting to be struck. It was waiting to be heard. As the Buddha said, there is nothing more dreadful than the habit of doubt. Doubt separates people. It is a poison that disintegrates friendships and breaks up pleasant relations. It is a thorn that irritates and hurts. Let the doubt fall away. Let the silence speak. Let the rhythm of your being be enough. You have not failed to make a sound. You have simply forgotten how deep your stillness already sings. Thank you for walking these 25 stories with me, through mist and fire, garden and bell, ache and silence. Each story was not a teaching. Each story was a mirror, held not before your face, but before your heart. And if, in even one of them, you found yourself gently reflected, then the journey was worth it. Please take a moment to share which story stayed with you. Comment. Subscribe, not just to this channel, but to your own life's quiet rhythm. Until next time, keep listening, not to the noise, but to the sound that plays, even when no one is striking the drum. If you've stayed with us until now, thank you. These stories were never meant to preach or teach, but to open something quiet inside. A breath you forgot, a wound that softened, a stillness that began to speak. If even one story touched your heart, helped you let go, or reminded you of something gentle and true, we invite you to share your experience in the comments below. What story resonated most with you? What insight or reflection stayed with you? What are you beginning to release, welcome or understand? Your words may become part of someone else's healing too. If you found peace here, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who may need this quiet. The more we walk this path together, the more we remember we are never truly alone, just waiting to hear the same silence. Until the next moment of stillness, be well, be kind, be here.